see the T jump debate? Oh, we're live. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's not yet. But welcome to Talking Time of Caffeine, the only podcast where we talk to people about stuff and drink caffeine or alcohol when you need be.
Hopefully this is more
a little bit of alcohol.
Oh, Tony's here.
Tony Reed, what?
Yeah, I know. Can you believe it? I made it.
Oh my God, this is surreal. I've been
So-
watching your channel since I was in high school, man. Thank you for your work.
No problem, man. I like your stuff too, man.
Thanks.
You all know who I am, so let's start from top to bottom. Introductions. I guess Dapper, you're top. You're first.
Oh, that's me. Well, I'm the Dapper Dinosaur. I have a little YouTube channel. I just hit 3,000 subscribers yesterday, I think. So that's fun. I do mostly counter-creationism stuff. I've had video series about creationist misrepresentations of astronomy, the Big Bang, biological evolution, taxonomy. I also have a weekly show with my co-host, Bent Hovind, no relation, where we basically just sit around and hang out with the chat and drink while we laugh at Kent Hovind video. We've been going through one of his seminar series, but we're going to take a break from that this week, and we're going to do something he recently uploaded that involves his crazy medical beliefs. Yeah, that was my reaction too.
Is that going to be covering his whole thing about how those like peach seeds cure cancer or something like that?
No, this is a different medical craziness than that. This one doesn't even touch on that. Yeah, the Kent Hovind medical craziness is a deep rabbit hole that I usually don't go down, but I'm making an exception.
So much to tap with that guy.
Yeah, he's a never-ending bottomless well of stupid. It's amazing.
I don't think even the heat death of the universe could stop him.
No. After the last black hole evaporates, there's going to be a little floating Kent Hovind DVD.
And tomorrow, if you're watching, go watch Dapper's 12-hour marathon of Kent marathon.
It's my Kent Hovind's greatest debate failures is what I believe the playlist is called. It's linked in my most recently uploaded video. I don't know. I mean, feel free to put a link in here if you want.
Yes, I do that.
So it's we're using Watch Together, which is a website where I can set up a list of YouTube videos to play, and then we all watch them simultaneously. And there's a chat, so there's a live chat for interaction. We can talk about whatever it is we're watching. And this is in honor of the fact that Kent Hovind has taken to basically asking that people dox themselves in order to debate him. So Erica and I we were trying to set up a joint debate where she and I would debate. And originally we wanted Kent Hovind to have a partner too, but he didn't seem to even understand that idea. So we dropped that. But then, he gave us those, and neither of us were willing to dox ourselves to debate Kent Hovind. So we said, well, instead, we'll just celebrate his obvious cowardice by
if you won't let him read your full home address on his opening statement, then you're just a coward.
Exactly. Yeah. So
Colton, you're next.
Okay, my name's Colton, otherwise known as Corporal Anon. I'm kind of new to this whole YouTube thing, but I've got a lot of friends supporting me with it, which is awesome. I'm a former young Earth creationist. I'm a geology student. Keep that in mind, I have no formal degrees, but I do have some formal training under my belt, and I'm about a year away from actually having a bachelor's. And today, the presentation I'm giving is on Earth's extinctions, the horrible events that our ancestors have barely survived. And hopefully it'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, so far we've survived. So far.
My name's Tony Reed. I have a show called How Creationism Taught Me Real Science. It's the ultimate Poe show, so if you start watching it for a minute and think that I'm a big-time creationist, just wait. Just wait. You'll see. As far as my training, I guess I do have a doctorate degree, but it's in divinity with a focus on apologetics. I did get the ministry. I did go to seminary. I am an ordained reverend, but I obviously have since then become an atheist. I never was a creationist, but there was a time when I didn't know enough about the science to even have any kind of idea where to have my opinion. And it was, in fact, creationist arguments and the act of apologetics, or just being an apologist, that kind of led me to realizing, maybe creationism is silly. And then, it didn't take too long for me to go, well, I guess the rest of the religious arguments are silly too.
Yeah, perish the thought that it's not true.
There was a time when questions about like some of the arguments that we would use were definitely frowned upon, and it really, it bothered me to my soul.
That was my general reaction too, although mine wasn't so much about apologetics in general, but just the creationism.
Yeah.
Mine was more about. Mine was less science thing and more history focused.
Yeah, that's another big field. But I can't comment on that, and I wouldn't dare to. I'm too afraid of getting things wrong.
Believe it or not, history is what I have a degree in.
Okay, you're my authority then. I will quote you.
Oh my goodness! Don't. It's a bachelor's degree. Don't go overboard on that.
Yeah, that's why I always never want to do debates, because I don't want to make my side look failure.
Hey, Dapper, just so you know, you may call it just a bachelor's degree, but I guarantee you put more work into your degree than I put into my doctorate degree. So I do not disrespect that for a second. You put a lot of work into that, and you know it.
That's true. I did put a lot of work into it.
Did you get your doctorate degree the same way King got his doctorate degree?
Almost. I actually went to seminary. I didn't do it over online. I went to Tustin, California, and went to the Blood of Christ Seminary, which probably isn't there anymore. But I got my actual doctorate degree by showing up to class. Even then, yes, I never brought that up with Kent Hovind when I debated him. We talked about our qualifications. I didn't bother to bring up the fact that I actually showed up to seminary. He got his stuff, just from an online course, I guess.
I believe it is possible to get legitimate doctorate degrees via correspondence, but it's not easy, and you still have to do things like, defend a thesis and actually do research and all that stuff, instead of just write a screed about your theological positions with grammar that would embarrass a high schooler, which is basically what Kent Hovind did.
Yeah.
Evolution's wrong because Darwin's dad was obese or something.
Granddad, come on now. Don't strong
Granddad. Oh my God.
It was Erasmus Darwin, who was so fat they had to cut a hole in the table to fit him.
Oh, plus it's wrong because this guy drew a bad photo one time.
Yeah. Ernst Haeckel, actually, his drawings actually weren't that inaccurate.
He just was rushed, wasn't he, for that first edition? He
was a bit rushed, and at least one of his embryos did not actually have a reference, which is pretty bad. However, it still wasn't all that inaccurate. But the paper not that long ago, and by not that long ago, I guess I mean 15 years ago now, that was oh, look at this, and they showed the comparisons to the photographs. Well, one of the things that they didn't bother to bring up was that Haeckel specifically mentioned that he oriented all the embryos the same way, which the photos didn't. And he excluded any maternal material, including yolks, which the photos didn't. When you do that, if you turn all those photos and you erase maternal material, suddenly the pictures that Haeckel drew look a whole lot more accurate. Surprise!
Wow.
It's funny because the theory that he was attempting to promote was not evolution; it was recapitulation theory. Yeah, and there is you may be right, but it's still his thesis was wrong.
Oh, yeah.
And it wasn't creationists that figured this out.
No,
it was evolutionary theorists that went, you kind of made some fudges here. Yeah. The creationists sat there and did nothing the whole time.
Right, and my only point there was it wasn't really fraud. There is evidence that he was on trial for fraud. There's no evidence of a conviction. And there really isn't enough evidence to say that he was defrauding people. Now, yes, he shouldn't have included a drawing without reference in a book. And that is, I
Makes you
think, the
also
worst.
wonder if this whole thing is a fraud, why did we put him on trial for it?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's like if that was what everyone was trying to do, everyone's like, oh, we gotta convince everyone of this evolution we know isn't true. Here's Haeckel trying to do that. Because while it wasn't evolution that he was working on, recapitulation theory did presume evolution.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was... The whole arguments about that are just... Like, they don't make a coherent argument against evolution on themselves. Like, there are creationist arguments that if they were true, if they were valid and true, would be arguments against evolution. This one isn't one of those.
Absolutely. But anyways, that's not what we're here to talk about. We should get into this.
It's like really fast. So, Tony, any update on your series? It's been you started for a few weeks and it ended again.
Yeah, unfortunately, work has gotten in the way. I have a professional life, and I've found some pretty good success with it, and I happen to have found an industry that I'm in right now that isn't really affected by. In fact, it's actually improved because of this whole apocalypse we're in right now. So, I mean, basically, I'm getting truckers on the road for a living, and so right now what we're short on is supplies. So I kind of got to work hard right now, and then it looks. I mean, I've got a video coming up. It's going to be a month or two away, but it's about information. Because the major argument one of the major arguments you see these days is about how does information come from nothing? Well, I'm going to show you how information, number one, is defined, and then number two, how it comes about, and then number three, how it's even relevant to this argument.
Awesome! Look forward to that. All right. So Colton, how's your voice? You said it was a little iffy before.
Yeah, I had a pretty bad sore throat the other day, and it's still kind of there, but nothing's gotten worse. So maybe I'm just an asymptomatic carrier of this virus. Who knows?
Well, then stay home, for God's sake. Come on.
Oh, I haven't left. I haven't left in weeks.
Yeah, are you 6 feet away from your camera, so we're not social distancing?
I was tempted to wear my N95 mask.
Oh, you know what? Someone called me out on my video today for not social distancing with Erica because, yeah.
It looks like you're about to eat her.
I didn't, though. I made sure to I made sure to eat before I visited. I had like a whole cow.
All right.
Well, just so you know, just the other day I was at the store and some guy was coughing to get people to move out of his way, and they did. He was coughing violently, and finally he came up to me. He got everybody between him and me finally left, and so he was right behind me, just started coughing, and he gave this insincere apologies, like I'm so sorry. And I turned around, I went, it's okay, I've already got it. I just left him there. He stopped coughing for some reason. I don't know why.
That's strange.
That is awesome.
Yeah. So, all right, Colton, take it away.
So, Earth's extinctions. What our ancestors barely survived. We're going to be talking.
So, do you have a favorite extinctions?
My favorite is actually the KPG extinction event, but we'll get to that later. So, as far as we know, Earth has experienced 6 mass extinctions, and we are currently in the middle of a 7th caused by our wonderful species. And coronavirus might take care of that, but we'll just have to see how that pans out. The first major mass extinction is often called the oxygen catastrophe, also known as from feast to famine. It's noted in the Precambrian rock record about 2 billion years ago, and it's correlated with a massive drop in oxygen isotopes, indicating the oxygen in the atmosphere suddenly dropped. This occurred right after the Great Oxygenation Event, which was caused by a surge in atmospheric O2, thanks to photosynthetic organisms that had started populating the oceans.
Yeah,
and
didn't that also cause an extinction event too? The rise in oxygen?
I'm not sure if it did. I know that this is one that happened right after because what essentially happened was once you had all this oxygen in the atmosphere, the non-photosynthetic organisms could actually start using it. They became aerobic, and it made them that it really boosted their metabolism and their population.
Okay, I thought I thought maybe some of the I thought they said some of the non-aerobic things died off because oxygen was like, okay, oxygen, we can't use
Yeah,
it.
I know a lot of it was toxic, but I don't think that qualified as a mass extinction. Certainly not compared to this.
Okay.
As one of the researchers, Peter Crockford, noted, and I forgot to put the source in there, I'm sorry. Over the 100 to 200 million years before this die-off event, there was a large amount of life on the planet, but after this event, a huge proportion died off. However, instead of recovering like more recent mass extinctions, the amount of life on the planet or the size of the biosphere stayed small for the following billion years of Earth history, about 2 billion to 1 billion years ago. What essentially occurred here was all this oxygen that had been released into the atmosphere and got absorbed by the oceans was allowing these microorganisms which weren't photosynthetic to have a much higher metabolism thanks to being able to process oxygen. And this caused their population to explode, which made them start chewing through all the nutrients that was available in the ocean extremely quickly. This is why it's often called from feast to famine. They plowed through all their available resources, and it just caused a lot of them to starve because there was next to no food left. And the oceans didn't really recover up until about 1 billion years ago, which is why the biosphere stayed very small.
This is about the time that on the Slushball Earth time or Snowball Earth you said in our last video.
Yep, that's all. It also correlates with that, which is going to, by getting Snowball Earth, you get this process known as a hydrological shutdown, where rivers stop pouring nutrients into the oceans, which compounds the problem because now they're not getting anything from the continents. They're not getting any phosphorus or anything being brought in by the rivers and the deltas.
So you got you two know anything about this this oxidation events?
This is actually one I'm not very familiar with.
This one was discovered like last year.
Oh, well, then that would explain it. I was going to say part of it is that when it comes to paleo stuff, what I tend to keep up with is very strongly in the vertebrate category, and then also very strongly slanted towards Sauropsida. So if there's a discovery outside of that, there's a chance that I'm just like, oh, I didn't hear about it.
This is before you were born, then.
But it is actually by a lot.
I actually was quite aware of the oxygenation events, and I know that the evidence has not really concluded it until recently, but this was theorized 20 years ago, and it held true for that entire time, obviously being confirmed. But I was aware of that, and several oxygenation events, and then also drops in. It coincided with a lot of extinctions, and I know you're going to go over this quite a bit, but I was aware of that. I actually mentioned it in my debate with Kat Hovind, where I discussed why the Earth has so much oxygen and happens to have life. There might be a correlation to that, and the fact that the only two planets close to us have an atmosphere of carbon dioxide. There's a reason why we have an oxygenated planet and not a carbon dioxide planet. So yeah, this is. By the way, I'm freaking glued to this so far, so I can't wait to hear the rest of this.
Yeah, like I knew about the rise in oxygen, but I didn't. This was new to me. I did not know about the right afterwards, the drop in oxygen right afterwards. So
I didn't know about the phosphates from the continents. I had no idea that might have also been a contributor. That's something I'm going to look up.
Oh, and I heard recently we might be having the cyanobacteria might be making a comeback.
I haven't heard anything about that, but that wouldn't surprise me.
Like all the stuff we're pumping in the air now, like it's like, hey, cyanobacteria are liking that apparently. Like, hey, more food for us.
Well, that wouldn't surprise me with how much like stuff like carbon we're releasing into the atmosphere, because they love to feast on that stuff. And when it gets absorbed by the oceans, that wouldn't shock me.
So I got this done. Time to move on.
Yep.
Poop.
So life was calm for a while after this, but eventually, and again correlating with another ice age, we reached the Ordovician-Silurian extinction event. This is one of the largest mass extinctions Earth has ever experienced, second only to the Permian-Triassic extinction. Occurred about 445 to 443 million years ago, killed about 85% of all life on Earth at the time. And we can, if you go to the next slide, we can get into the causes.
Trying to find. Are we anywhere in this Are we anywhere in this picture?
Honestly, I couldn't tell you. I just found it because I like orthocones, and I was trying to go into how they died later.
Oh yeah.
I don't see any obvious vertebrates.
Yeah, I don't think any of our ancestors are here right now.
Yeah, I see trilobites. Oh, so
A
this
lot of corals.
I see no bilaterians of any sort.
Yeah.
Actually.
Wait, no bilaterians. Come on, there's a trilobite, there's an orthocone, there's a eurypterid. Those are all bilaterians.
I guess I just got schooled. Okay, thank you.
Get schooled, Evotard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is. I guess this is the,
Evotard.
Careful there.
I guess this is the time after the Camularis.
Yeah, it is.
So
Although actually, there was a relic population of Anomalocaris that actually did extend outside the Cambrian that was discovered not that long ago.
oh, yeah.
Well, not Anomalocaris, but Anomalocarids. It wasn't the same genus, obviously. Sorry.
Right.
Oh, wait,
How dare you?
I know.
I see a jellyfish.
Oh yeah, they've been around for a
Yes.
long time. So,
It's just a little jelly.
during the Ordovician, we had very, very active plate tectonics, and this allowed for abundant volcanism. These mass volcano eruptions caused a lot of CO2 to be released into the atmosphere. And the carbon cycle then caused this CO2 to be sequestered in carbonate rocks like limestone. Now, normally, the carbon cycle maintains sequestration in carbonate rock and volcanic output in an equilibrium. It keeps it very balanced. But here in the Ordovician period, isotopic data indicates that the sequestration actually outpaced the volcanic eruptions, which reduced CO2 in the atmosphere and started cooling the planet. This eventually caused massive glaciers to dominate the end of the Ordovician period. And during the Ordovician period, most of the continents had massive epicontinental seas where you could walk from, I believe, if you looked at it today, from about Michigan to California in neck-deep water. So it was very shallow, very vast seas. And obviously, when you have glaciers like these form, you start lowering sea level and the available habitat starts shrinking. There's very little places for these organisms to survive. And although we do see some evidence at the beginning of colder organisms adapted to the cold starting to take their place, they didn't survive the ultimate drop in sea level. And a lot of them were just left to suffocate as the waters just completely receded from the continents. As you can see in the picture there's a poor little orthocone just dying, suffocating, and freezing to death because he's got nowhere to go.
Press F in the chat for the
orthocone.
cephalopod boys. Yeah. Poor guys. They just weren't curly enough. Weren't curly enough.
Okay, two things. Hey, Colton, can you in the private chat, can you link your channel name so I can put it in the description?
Oh yeah. Let me do
And
that.
And also, I don't know if this is true anymore or not, but I remember a few years ago when I was watching the documentary about it, I think at the time they thought that it might have been caused by a nova or something somewhere else.
Yeah, there is some debate that there was a gamma ray burst, which may have depleted our atmosphere of certain protective elements and was what triggered the glaciations. But as far as I know, there's not a whole lot of evidence to support that, and there's a lot of evidence for the volcanism at the time. And there's Erica.
Hey, Erica's here.
I'm here. I'm ready to go. I'm just in time for the Ordovician.
Fresh off of the most polite debate that anyone has ever seen, right?
Oh, Jesus Christ.
Erica, I watched that whole thing.
Then I'm sorry you wasted your time.
So, Erica, have you met Tony yet?
No, have I met Tony? Tony and I are friends on Facebook now.
Oh,
You are. I've never met you, but I've been watching your channel for a while. I love your content. You did a video about dogs that, I mean, I don't think anybody cares about the dogs that are in this particular conversation, but I thought that was the most fascinating thing about the relationship between humans and dogs. It borders on what's the word I'm using? It doesn't matter. Symbiosis. That's a word. It borders on symbiosis. And especially in our early evolution, I absolutely loved it. I loved also that you use scenes from the movie Alpha, which I don't know anybody's seen, but that is an amazing movie.
Listen,
It is
highly
a
recommend.
great movie.
It's so cute. I instantly came home and was snuggling the hell out of my dog after Alpha. Yeah, I think that's, you know, it's a lot of the recent anthropology on that has been very surprising. Like no one really had any idea really until like 2010 what a huge role domesticating canids, or rather them domesticating themselves, had on us out competing pretty much every other hominid, which is very cool. I'm very thankful for our dogs today.
Well, I mean, yeah, are you going to try to steal the mammoth from the guy who's got a pack of dogs around him?
Yep.
Anyway, that was a fascinating video, and that just kind of led me to watch all of the rest of your videos. Love your work.
Oh, thank you so much. I actually love your channel as well. I'm 99. If I'm not subbed, I'm going to be pissed because I could have sworn I was. Hold on. Let me double check.
I'm subscribed to Tony on at least 2 of my YouTube accounts. I have several. I don't remember exactly which ones I'm subscribed to who on.
You know, I remember when Tony, when you put out that video on like Mary Schweitzer and the soft tissue thing, I got that notification while I was in 12th grade having a discussion with somebody about that very topic.
Nice.
It was perfect timing.
Wow, I didn't plan that, just so you know.
You were coordinating with a high school senior Colton there?
Yeah, clearly he was.
Well, apparently there was an unbeknownst to the rest of us, rather, there was a coordination going on with past version of Colton and current Jackson Whedon RJ.
Oh,
That's
yes.
right.
Have you read their book? I mean, have you gotten their book?
I'm about halfway through it right now, and they cited an old League of Reason post I made back when I was 16.
Nice.
I'd completely forgotten I'd made.
So you're in the book.
Yeah, I am a source in their book. Yes.
So
Awesome.
It was actually very fun. I was in the stream where Colton made the big reveal, and Jackson and RJ were like, it was very enjoyable. RJ was so hype about the whole thing too. He gets excited, and when he gets excited, it's contagious. I was like, oh man, yeah, okay.
Oh, I was talking to RJ after that whole thing for at least a solid 5 hours, and it ended up. I mentioned his fiction book once, and he just started going off on it for hours, and it was really nice to see somebody that happy about their pet project.
Well, I love your real fiction. Also, Tony, I subbed to you. I was already, so if you get any, you shouldn't get any new notifications from me unless it's a comment.
I wouldn't be upset if I did.
So since you're a little late, Erica, this is before your time, but do you have any knowledge or opinions about the oxygenation event?
He's referring to the extinction event that happened about 2 billion years ago after the Great Oxygenation happened. And I've heard it be called the oxygen holocaust. I've also just heard it be called the oxygen catastrophe. But it was basically where oxygen dropped and a bunch of little microorganisms basically ran through their food supply. And
so is that the one that's coordinated with Snowball Earth ? Okay, or Slushball Earth as Colton subscribes.
Yes, I am the proponent, but there is much debate.
I was explaining that to someone the other day, and I was like, yeah, there's this difference between Snowball Earth and sort of Slushball Earth, and the person I was talking to was like, well, what's the difference? And I was like, well, in one of them there's like this little channel running kind of across the equator, and they were like how little.
I should just do a video on it. Forget the creationism stuff. I should just lay out what the difference is.
No, listen, I I gotta say, as much as I like making creationist busting content, I have actually probably quite a bit more fun with the stuff that's just interesting in and of itself.
All right.
I don't think we have to
Right.
do a one or the other kind of thing. You can do some alternating. That's why I have like my things
Awesome.
that aren't dinosaurs videos, where I'm just like, you know what? This has nothing to do with creationism. We're just going to look at some cool extinct stuff that maybe you think is a dinosaur, but no, it's not.
Yeah,
Oh,
Yeah.
go ahead. Sorry.
I was gonna say we watched the debunk creationist stuff for a good laugh, then we watched the real science stuff for the learn stuff.
True. Dapper, I was I was pleased to see in the chat.
No,
last
actually,
night
I got to say, I
you were
really
having
enjoyed
fun
that episode you did on time. Sorry.
on
sorry.
what? No,
Oh yeah,
go
I
ahead.
really enjoyed. As far as Dapper, I really enjoyed your episode on Dimetrodon. I've always been fascinated with that particular animal, and and I actually I talked to myself. I talked somebody out of a girl that I met. I talked her out of going out with me because she happened to have a little toy Dimetrodon, and she's like, "This is my little dinosaur." I was like, "That's not a dinosaur." And she goes, "What do you mean it's not a dinosaur?" I said, "It's more closely related to you and me than it is to dinosaurs. It lived 90 million years before dinosaurs." And at that point in time, she was not any more interested in me. That was it.
Facts before females.
It's true. Yeah. She wasn't right for you. If she wasn't willing to accept correction on Dinosauria, no, there's just wouldn't have worked. Well, I'm sorry. What was it, Erica?
Oh, that's
I
my
was
next
gonna say,
criterion.
Yeah, I was pleased to see in the chat. I was very briefly in that Neffy conversation, and I think it was in the one with Ol Neff, and I believe you were chatting with Standing, and Standing for truth, right? Was appalled at last night's antics.
Oh my goodness!
And I was like, when you got the seal of approval from old SFT.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that most creationists are embarrassed by being represented by people like Nathan Thompson. I would be embarrassed to be represented by someone like Nathan Thompson.
I would pay a $20 price tag to see Kent Hovind and Nathan Thompson have a conversation about flat Earth.
You're not the only one. Bent Hovind would probably pony up a little bit more than that. Yeah, because he really would really like to see a debate where Kent Hovind has to be right and then still try to defend it and then possibly still fail.
Yeah, Kent. Oh man. Yeah, I'm sorry. I've derailed the entire thing. Let us talk about the Ordovician.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Refer again. You're also doing a series on this topic too, aren't you?
Yeah, love extinctions. I cannot recommend my primary.
You were my source for the Devonian one, which I think is coming up next, because I couldn't find a whole lot on it that was easy to digest and break down.
I'm excited. Yes, the Devonian's weird. Well, we can talk about it when we get there. Continue.
Okay, before we move on, do you have an opinion on this extinction?
Ordovician? I really wish that Chimeroceras has been spared from the Ordovician, that big ice cream cone boy with the 20-foot long shell. I think that guy. I'm some of the descriptions that I've read suggested that they may be. I don't know what you call a plural of cephalopods. I don't know that you would call it like a pod.
Cephalopoda?
No, like a group of them. You have a pod of creations.
So the Greek would be cephalopodus.
No, I mean, like, how you call a group of birds a flock?
Oh, like the mass count, the mass noun, like a flock of cephalopodas?
Or like a pod or a
T Lane just commented, T-Jump made my brain go to putty. Am I missing something?
T-Jump.
T-Jump debated Neffy on the existence of dinosaurs walking with man last night.
Neffy debated. T-Jump just did hand-waving dismissals that didn't address anything.
Yeah, I mean, let me put it this way, Colton. At one point, Neffy was like, you need to show empirical evidence that humans and dinosaurs could not have lived at the same time. Which, of course, for all of us, the answer immediately goes, okay, well, radiometric dating. Literally any kind. Or any dating method, really. Yeah. But he didn't bring it up because T-Jump usually does, like, Dapper and I were talking about this over Twitter, but he usually does, like, philosophical arguments, I guess. So his whole thing is hand waving, kind of. It seemed. I don't know. He needed to brush up on biology, in my opinion, just because I think it really would have helped.
Yeah,
Actually,
that's why I always recommend don't go outside your field of expertise. There's a reason I'm not here to debate history or like biology.
Actually, Eric Viothaler, who's been, I think he's been on this channel before, right? Eric Viothaler?
Yeah.
Yeah, he offered to send T-Jump a whole big thing he prepared about all of the creationist claims about dragons and dinosaurs and dinosaurs living with humans. Because Eric has done a lot of work on trying to find all those arguments and debunk them. And T-Jump just was like, nah, I'll be okay. All right, fine, sure.
Well, I mean, I can't imagine turning down help like that, but whatever. Not my monkeys, not my circus.
Yeah. All I know is when it comes to dinosaurs living with humans, it's true they did, and they are delicious.
That's true. Yeah.
Very true.
Fair enough.
Not the dinosaurs. They claim that they live with us, but still, they're still here.
Another kind of cool note about the Ordovician, just to kind of bring us back around, and I didn't know this until I was looking at the Devonian, but I had no idea that any Eurypterids actually made it through the Ordovician, but evidently there was a small group of them that lasted till the Devonian.
Yeah, same thing happened with trilobites, although not with the Ordovician extinction.
Right.
So,
Well, there is the possibility that Eurypterida is paraphyletic and that scorpions are actually
Just
surviving
Eurypterids?
Eurypterids. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. I hope. That would be very cool.
That'd be cool.
Yes.
so do we know what we were back then?
And the Ordovician?
Yeah.
A very small agnathan, probably,
Yep.
or something very similar to an agnathan. So your jawless fish. Correct me if I'm wrong, Dapper, but it would have been something very close to an oversized lancelet, essentially.
One
it would have
day
been
my ancestors will dominate the overworld.
The time of tetrapod decadence is upon us.
It might have been a little bit less basal than a lancelet. Lancelets are about as basal as a chordate can get as far as the modern world goes. It might have been a little bit closer to like an olfactorate. So it might have had like a single nostril like you get in hagfish.
Yeah.
Although it wouldn't have been much like a hagfish, because hagfish themselves have very highly derived characteristics for their kind of parasitic life that the chordates at the time wouldn't have had. So it's a little weird, but I don't think we have anything that's around that I could point to and like that would be what we would have probably looked like. But I think by this time, olfactorates would probably have been the clade closest to our current clade that you could definitely identify that, yeah, these are things that are probably in that clade, probably olfactorates, which is a little bit past craniates.
Yeah, I know that at this time period, it used to be like nicknamed one of the many nicknames for the Ordovician was like the age without fish, because there were no fish yet. The Devonian's the age of the fishes. And then they've sort of kind of diversified through the Silurian. But if I remember correctly, there were actually kind of fish, right?
Right.
But they would have been, as you said, basal for fish, but derived for like agnathans, kind of.
Yeah, like we're not talking about like, because like you mentioned the lancelet, and that's basically, it has sort of like a fish-like body, and it has little feeding tentacles. It doesn't have a skull. It doesn't even have like a cartilaginous skull structure.
It has like a notochord though, right?
It does have a notochord. It has a dorsal notochord. It has a dorsal fin. It has a little caudal fin, and it has little feeding tendrils and gills. And so it actually has a lot of gills. And one of the things that's interesting is a lot of these gill arches in the first craniates actually become the cartilaginous structures that underlie the skull. So the vertebrate skull is actually a series of paired gill arches that have been shoved around up into the front to help protect what is evolving into a real brain. Whereas at the time of the very earliest true chordates, this would have just been a little ganglion that is slightly helpful in coordinating the rhythmic swimming and whatnot.
Well, I think I'm sorry to drag this out because I know Colton is itching to get to this moment. But I think that's an excellent hypothetical to present to creationists as well. So when I say hypothetical, I mean sort of as a more direct chain of events. But it's like, if you have a bundle of sensory apparati, whatever, hanging out in your sort of tagma to the front, any kind of protection that accidentally mutates in that location is going to be selected for, as long as it doesn't hinder feeding or breathing.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's like a perfect example of like, look, whatever shows up is going to probably stick around.
Right.
Was this
sorry.
was this the time that our rivals, the protostones, came on land yet? Or
Well, that would have been the first arthropods to come on land. So I actually don't remember off the top of my head. Oh, yeah.
I don't think
I
so.
can't remember either.
Correctly, arthropods begin to make that journey because essentially, you're not going to get anything on land before plants. It's going to be plants first.
Right.
And plants first make that sort of movement at the beginning of the Silurian. At least that's kind of what it looks like they're thinking now. Now there's going to be a lot of overlap between when the plants start and then when the arthropods are like, holy shit, there's all this stuff up here.
Food.
Let me just follow along and in turn get away from all of these nasty critters in the water. So I don't know.
That's right, TD. Everybody gangs until the plants kill everything.
Yeah, true. I tend to lean towards sooner rather than later. I mean, you look at how quickly, as soon, like right now is a perfect example with like the virus going around and no one's going into cities. And so a lot of animals are just showing up again. It's like as soon as a niche is open, something can exploit it so long as there's a food source.
I actually went kayaking a few weeks ago after all the marinas around Florida had been shut down, and dolphins did not hesitate to start coming into the ports.
Oh, that is so cool.
yeah,
So it's really nice to just be out on the water, and you see sea turtles, sharks, dolphins, everything out there because they're not afraid of being hit by a boat.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's not much I miss about being on the ocean, but dolphins are one of the few things.
yeah.
I like
There's this parking lot, right? Business shut down where I lived 10 years ago, and now it's like a grassy field now. Turn around to see it.
Yeah, they showed a pavilion in Rome. I don't know the name of it, but people walk on it. Hundreds, probably thousands of people every day walk along this pavilion. And of course, they shut it down several weeks ago. And like 2 weeks after they shut it down, back when Italy was first sounding the alarms, grass starts poking up through the cracks in the bricks. And I don't know. It's heartening to know that as soon as humans get out of the way, life's going to be okay. We're no good at. We're not going to be successful at sterilizing this planet. If the Permian couldn't do it, we can't do it. That's no excuse for not taking action. I'm just saying.
If I can bring up some bad science that I've seen, there was a paper I read recently that hypothesized that dinosaurs actually did have civilization, and that. Okay, I'm glad you didn't spit out what you were drinking, but you almost did.
I did. I swallowed it just in time.
All right. Anyway, so yeah, there's this theory that dinosaurs had civilization, and because of how quickly things break down, the reason why we don't see any evidence of that is simply supported by what's going on right now. This paper was written, I would say, 20 years ago. I thought it was funny then, but I love that it actually has some grounding in what's going on right now.
Well, yeah, it's a really good question because, so I'm not supporting the idea, but what I'm saying is we know for a fact that we don't have even close to all of the species that have ever existed. And we also don't know how long a civilization is likely to last. And if a civilization only lasted as long as human civilization has, it's quite possible that within 1 million years or so, there would be virtually no trace of it anywhere. And within 10 million years, it would be completely indistinguishable, except for perhaps some kind of weird isotope excursion, if they got to the point where like fossil fuel burning was a thing. So like in 20 million years, if we assume that humans don't make it 20 million years, if someone were to look at the quote Anthropocene, they would probably just call it like the late Eocene carbon isotope excursion and be done with it.
Oh,
I got a feeling they're going to notice plastic.
Maybe.
Dapper, you seen Voyager, right?
Yeah, the Voth. We're going with the Voth, the dinosaur species from Voyager. Yeah,
that's what happened to them. They
managed to get out of Dodge before the asteroid impact, apparently, and then travel all the way across the galaxy for some reason, not bothering to stop anywhere else, and then set up shop at like 25,000 light years away. I don't know why, but according to Star Trek Voyager, Sure, why not? Let's do it.
Yeah, well,
Wait,
have you ever had a Big Mac attack in the middle of the night? I mean, you'll make it to whatever destination you're going towards.
Well, yeah, it's just that in Star Trek, though, the galaxy is littered with these Earth-like worlds, so it's a little bit strange to suggest that these dinosaurs would be going across the galaxy and not stopping anywhere closer.
Maybe they were picky.
Actually, I think you think about the Star Trek worlds are an example of convergent evolution because all the planets got humanoid forms eventually.
Oh no, actually, in Star Trek, it's legitimately intelligent design. That's why there's humanoids. The Star Trek answer is straight up: intelligent aliens designed life across numerous worlds to evolve into humanoids.
Yeah,
exactly how that would happen is left a little bit ambiguous, but that is the Star Trek answer: is intelligent design.
There was an episode where they kind of went to some planet and they found some message saying, "Hey, we put our design out there for all species." So, yeah, it was interesting. Like they left a seed of their own. I think they went extinct, but their design went out to the rest of the galaxy. I'm done geeking out though.
Imagine being so. No shame on the Star Trek writers, but imagine being so narcissistic as a species to be like, yes, the humanoid form. This is peak physical performance for an organism.
You may not like it, but this is what peak performance looks like. Yeah. Please ignore the problems with my foot design.
I want to defend the Star Trek writers a little bit here. So they have a problem here where for decades now, Star Trek has been showing almost exclusively humanoid species as being the intelligent species in the galaxy. There were a few exceptions. I can only think of like 2 that were in any way significant. But basically everyone is just an alien with a funny forehead or like a weird nose or something, right? Everybody.
Hey, Erica, evidently Standing for Truth did a video response to you and Aaron Ra's video.
Yeah, I saw that. I've got like 6 things to respond to for Standing
because apparently it's worth making a rebuttal to someone's discussion because you're that insecure about your belief system.
Yeah, I actually watched most of it and it was pretty bad. But But the thing is, the Star Trek writers didn't actually say that the humanoid form was peak performance. They said that basically a humanoid species had, because of their own vanity and desire not to be forgotten by the universe, had just pre-programmed some life to evolve into humanoid forms. But they didn't actually go as far as to say, well, because our form is the greatest. They were just like, we wanted to leave a legacy of things that look like us.
Fair enough. I don't know that you could. I mean, this is me coming after the Star Trek Voyager writers again, but
that was TNG.
Yeah, okay, TNG. This is me coming after the next generation writers again. But it's almost like people think evolution is exactly that, like this pre-programmed path.
Yeah.
When it's all just mutation acting on
yeah, there were some orthogenetic overtones to that episode.
Yeah,
I would argue that actually chimps are better evolved for the future, in that we have 2 limbs that are great for walking, and we have 2 limbs that are great for grabbing, but chimps have 4 limbs that are great for grabbing. If we're going to be a spacefaring species, I would say that chimps are better designed for that future because they can grab things.
Chimps are pre-adapted for space travel. Is that what we're going with?
That's what I'm saying, and I don't think Star Trek's ever going to agree with me.
For those of you out here who are curious, I'm sure you guys have all seen it or have at least heard of it. There was a Discovery Channel special called Alien Planet years ago.
Oh, yes.
I love that. Oh, my God. Neo Sapiens.
Yeah, that's what I was going to bring up. Yeah, Neo Sapiens is peak fit. That's peak physical performance right there.
Yeah, you get to change your buoyancy relative to the air so that you can just fly without any particularly large effort. Yeah,
imagine being a terrestrial ammonite. That's essentially what they were.
Yeah. But with clubs.
And they had 2 like.
Well, in the book, if you get the book, they fought with spears too. Like they would spear. They would. What were they called? The arrow tongues. They would spear the arrow tongues from the ground.
Yeah, Expedition, right?
Yeah, Expedition by Wayne Barlow.
Yeah.
Oh wait, no, it was arrow. No, not the arrow tongues. I don't think, anyways, because the arrow tongues, the T-Rex looking thing.
Yeah, they were basically.
What was the natural jet?
darts. I think they were called darts or something.
No, they
darters or
had
something.
jet darters, but those were small. Those were like scavengers.
Oh,
Hold on, I got a
Lancer or
picture of it
something
right
I'm
like
doing it. I'm doing it because
Okay.
I love this
Okay.
feature.
I would, but my keyboard is way too loud for that.
Mine is too. I don't care.
So back on the fast, was this the only extinction event that wasn't like a borderline, like in between two things?
No, this was between the Devonian and the Silurian.
I was just wondering because they never call this one like you say the Devonian Silurian. You mean the carbon?
Well, there was the Devonian, the Silurian, and then the Carboniferous.
I thought the Silurian was before the Devonian.
No.
No.
So
It's easy. I used to get them mixed up too.
because
Yeah.
in your like, so I thought the Carboniferous was after the Devonian.
Yes. So you went from the Devonian period to the Silurian, where fish started to diversify and forests started to establish themselves, and then you get the massive rainforests of the Carboniferous.
Yeah.
That's wondering because last one you said.
The Silurian you can kind of think of as like when the true Osteichthyans, as opposed to sort of the placoderms who were a little bit outside the Actinopterygian, Sarcopterygian group.
Hold on, boys.
Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just interrupting because I double checked because I was actually on Vandalia's kind of mindset that it was Silurian prior to Devonian, followed by.
Oh, maybe it was.
Oh, okay. Never mind.
Yeah.
I was confusing who was saying who, but I pulled it up and it is Ordovician, Silurian, Devonian, Carboniferous.
Oh man.
Sorry,
As
my
far as
bad.
I know, the Silurian period didn't really experience a giant extinction event. I mentioned that somewhere later, but it was like a very minor turnover. It was nowhere near the scale of the big ones.
I think I was mixed up then. Yeah. Whoops. Sorry, guys. I definitely get stuff wrong.
So
I do that all the time.
with the late Devonian extinction, they aren't really sure of the time span. There's estimates anywhere from as low as 500,000 years to as long as 25 million years. We know that it was sparked by proliferation of forests in the Devonian. These forests, what they would do, they were mostly lycopods, I believe, and they would break down the rocks and dump nutrients like phosphorus into rivers, which were then carried to the oceans. And this is where you get massive algae blooms. We have this in Florida almost annually with these nasty red tides, and they kill just about everything near them.
Mm-hmm.
It literally sucks the oxygen out of the water, and it just kills anything that breathes it. And even the fumes that it gives off for like the dolphins who come up to breathe, it just chokes their lungs. And the problem with the Devonian, too, is that the epicontinental seas were actually very narrow. And so these blooms didn't disperse. They just congregated, and they kept blooming, and they kept getting bigger, and it led to a runaway effect. And all of these blooms were not just suffocating everything on the ground, but then you also had the forest doing a sort of a 1-2 punch, where not only were they giving more fuel to this algae, and making that problem worse, but they were also growing and sucking the CO2 out of the atmosphere. And there are estimates that up to 90% of atmospheric CO2 was taken up by these forests, which of course leads to, again, massive global cooling. We know that as this cooling started, you get a second extinction pulse, which is called the Hannenberg event, I believe is how it's pronounced. And what this closed off the Devonian, and it's named for the Hannenberg Shale, which is part of a sequence that straddles the Devonian Carboniferous boundary. What happens is the second pulse also led to major glaciations, and we had that happen during the late Devonian too. And so you're combining massive anoxia of the oceans, giant blooms of algae, suffocating everything around them and not being able to disperse because of how narrow the seas are. Trees sucking all the carbon out of the atmosphere, which is leading to runaway glaciation events, which is very short but very intense. And this is why we end up having a lot of black shale deposits from the Devonian period, because there was so much anoxia that everything was dying off, and you had very little time for stuff to decay.
I think what you mean is we know that there were some low oxygen periods of the flood.
If you have ever seen their attempts to defend why mass extinction events correlate with isotope excursions, it's hysterical.
I
It
have
is literally
sounds
just-
hysterical.
I have seen one response to it by Georgia Purdom, and that's it.
That's the second
Oh,
Georgia
Georgia.
pops up is when you run for the hills, and this is quite mean, but you can only run so far. Her towering, very tall skull just casts an infinite shadow.
Is it her skull or is it the hairdo?
It's
She's fixed her hair recently,
It's a
and
little,
I
little
appreciate
column A, little column B. You know.
listen, I do think it's mostly the hairdo, and I will be mean because hairdos are something you can change.
Yeah, you're choosing to live
You
like
can
that.
change it. Yeah, you can change a hairdo. So I will throw shade on Georgia for that.
Is that a boat?
Oh yeah, this is just an example of a modern algae bloom. This is what they look like.
No,
Although
that's
in Florida, they're red.
that's not a time travel boat.
I
So
wish.
we can only hope.
So where were we in this during this all this happening?
On land. We're making our way during the Devonian period. We're
Oh,
already
this was when like Tiktaalik was starting to pop
Yeah.
up, wasn't it?
well. It depends because I know there are. I actually, Colton, if you'll remember this on Debate Evolution, I had a very long conversation with who was it? Might have been Christ Conspirator, but it might have
Christian
also
conspirator. I know that idiot.
Yeah, it might have been him. But yeah, there's an excellent trackway in Poland that is a sort of tetrapod trackway from the Devonian.
I'm aware of it.
Yeah, and what I didn't understand when I was initially studying or like researching, I guess, tetrapods is the difference between, and this is so ridiculous that it didn't even occur to me, but it's like your speciation time and your divergence time are vastly different. And so it's like the divergence of tetrapods, right, from Tiktaalik or Eusthenopteron, depending on where you want to draw the line, is far earlier than the earliest fossils, the earliest complete fossils that we find, because obviously the sooner an organism is settled into its niche, the more it can exploit it, the more it can proliferate, and the more likely it is that an organism will die and fossilize under the right conditions. So it's going to be a huge range, and at least according to some of the trackways that we have that are dated to the Devonian, it seems reasonable to suggest that we very well could have been making these treks onto land at this time period as little itty bitty Acanthostega or Ichthyostega, probably still spending quite a bit of time in those intercoastal little.
Once again, like I like to admit that we mentioned in our private video, we can admit when we get stuff wrong.
True. Yes, true.
I can certainly attest to that.
Yeah, it's a hard lesson to learn, but honestly, I've been there. I've made many. I've probably made mistakes on this video that I'm not even aware of yet.
Oh, same. I'm sure I have. I'm trying to be accurate.
I think too, just because I just touched on this for my video, but the fact that we lost all of the placoderms in this extinction is huge.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's an entire extreme.
Well, especially with the ones that have all that heavy armor on them.
Yeah.
I mean,
any idea why?
Do we?
Yeah, that would have been cool to see in an aquarium, a placoderm aquarium.
I mean,
Yeah,
any idea why they would have died out at that particular time?
I think, and this is total speculation, but I do know that a lot of the placoderms were interconnected in their own ecosystem. So it's like your big Dunkleosteus, right? I got my dude right here. Your big Dunkleosteus might be preying on, I think it's Petalichthyes, I can't remember, your smaller placoderms, in the same way that many fish just eat each other.
So the Dunkleosteus, or however it's pronounced, do you think it ate seaweed before Adam and Eve ate the literal fruit?
Hey, that guillotine makes a great seaweed snipper.
I guess.
Yeah. Oh man.
Yeah, I
Why does he need the armor if he was supposed to be perfect?
it's decorative.
Maybe it's really sharp seaweed.
Yeah, true. I
Maybe.
think the armor is just to show off to obviously all the placoderms that we find are male placoderms, and it's just sexual armor.
Oh well, we wouldn't find many of the females since without the bony plates, what would we be looking for, right?
True. Very
Yeah.
true.
So there you go.
We gotta remember, the female had to evolve the exact same time as the male did.
Oh,
Otherwise,
that's
they'd
true.
not-
Yeah.
Dang.
Have you
Thanks
heard?
again.
Have you heard Ian Juby's argument about that?
I don't like Ian Juby at all.
No,
Why
I
would
don't
listen
either.
to him?
Well, because it's hilarious. His big argument as to why sex disproves evolution is that if the male intromittent organ changes even to a
Oh,
small degree in
God.
size or shape, it will no longer be accepted by the reproductive tract of the female, thereby dooming the entire species.
Oh my god.
And it's just like, Ian, you
It's,
belong to a species with a fairly wide range of size and shape and intermittent organs. That is not a common barrier to fertility. Like at all.
No.
Yeah.
Does he know anything about how gametes work?
I just don't think he's ever had sex or ever talked to anyone who's had
You
sex.
know, that would not surprise me.
Yeah, I'd make fun of him for being fat, old, and bald, and with a crappy beard and mustache, but that would be hypocritical.
But yeah, like it can't just be that he's never had sex. He has to have never talked to anyone who has or ever read about it. That's the only thing I can think
am
of.
convinced that a vast majority of diehard creationists are terrified to talk to women.
Yeah, that's
I
possible.
know.
That was my experience, at least at my church, and it was not
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
It was
I
not good.
don't know. I think too that even if you do have a creationist that kind of manages to, we're assuming a male creationist, obviously, that manages to, bag a femoid, we can just go ahead and assume, right, that that's going to be their single partner, and they will white knuckle that individual until they agree to marry them, in which case it's obviously just it's a part of God's plan, right? And they just happen to match intermittent organ wise, and so they probably just think all of them are like those that they possess.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
catch
that's-
my drift.
Well,
So
and I
far-
mean, you can't test it because that would be sinful. So
Of course.
Before we move on, like, so fast, I've noticed that these last three extinctions have all involved glaciers.
Yep.
yeah,
Carbon
And,
injection.
and that's not necessarily because of the glaciers themselves, but because the glaciers are also tied to another problem, another break in the ecosystem.
Oh, so you're
So,
saying
like-
it's just a coincidence?
Let's play a game.
Ow.
Let's play a game. Have a drink every single time there is a mass extinction that is directly tied to the carbon silicate cycle.
Dude,
And
I
you'll
cannot
have-
keep drinking this. I'm already buzzed.
Yeah, you will have exactly as many drinks as there are extinction events. It's all tied to the carbon silicate cycle.
Oh,
Well,
fuck.
I mean-
All right.
we might be able to give like the KPG one a little bit of a pass because it
Okay.
wasn't a natural interruption to the cycle. It was a weird
But-
short-term event.
But deck and traps.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to disagree with you about the deck and traps.
It is also
All right.
the geekiest drinking game I've ever heard of, and I love
Tony, you played the Kent Hovind drinking game.
Oof.
that was hard because
Yeah.
that was you told me there was like a half hour left to the video, and we didn't get through it in 2 hours.
No, not even close.
Oh, tomorrow for your thing, you should set up a game of Kenthoven bingo or something.
Ooh.
God.
I'll try to be there if I'm not hungover.
Well, it'll be going for a while, so don't worry.
Yeah.
You've got plenty of time.
You mentioned waters. D5.
After the Devonian extinction were so much suffocated, those forests proliferated quite a bit, and we ended up getting this supercontinent that formed, or well, close to a supercontinent. You had Gondwana, and then you had a couple of smaller ones. And you ended up getting these massive rainforests. And things are pretty good for quite a while. You have the oxygen spike up to about 30%. You don't have any organisms which are capable of digesting plant material. So coal just starts forming like crazy because it just piles up and nothing can be done about it. But eventually, things have to come to an end, as they always do. So what happens when you've got, and this is very similar to the Devonian, what happens when you have a bunch of plants dominating the landscape? CO2 gets sucked up like crazy, and that leads to more global cooling. If you look at that little chart I've got there, all that blue, that shows where the Carboniferous glaciers dominated. So again, we've got more glaciers being tied to a drop in the carbon cycle. The glaciation was relatively short-lived, but it was very intense and very aggressive. The glaciers covered almost all of southern Gondwana, Sea levels are thought to have dropped by as much as 100 meters, and the cooling not only led to a drop in sea level and glaciers appearing, but it also caused conditions to become a lot cooler and a lot drier. And that last part especially started causing things to become very arid. Cool and arid climate is not conducive to the survival of massive rainforests, nor to the fauna which lives within them. Rainforests in response began to shrink into isolated patches, which were mostly, towards the end of this collapse, were isolated to wet river valleys. And what this causes is not only are the plants dying off because they can't take the conditions, but the animals are running out of food, so their populations start dropping as well.
And I guess this is where our amphibious cousins weren't dominating.
Yeah, they weren't very capable of surviving this one. So what happened towards the very end is that the glaciers did start retreating and things started warming up about as quickly as they cooled off. So when you've already got these weakened rainforests, they're very isolated, and now the temperature starts ramping up in the other direction, well, they can't take that kind of rapid change, and it causes the remaining patches of forest to die.
So did we call this the Mississippian rainforest collapse? Since we named this period?
I believe it would be called. Does the Pennsylvania to the Mississippian come first? I can't remember. I can barely think.
Colton, let me ask you a question. So this is the end of the Carboniferous, yes?
Yep, very end of it.
So I was just curious. You guys probably know like Arthroplura, the big, minibus sized, not literally minibus, but it looks like a giant train of a millipede, right?
Yeah.
6-7 feet long or something like that. Very wide.
The little guy didn't make it.
Yeah, I pulled it up because I was like, I wonder if because you would think that an organism that feeds on like detritus, which is what a lot of millipedes feed on, would be having a great heyday during all of the Carboniferous and just
That
really
was that oxygen drop.
Yeah, but then you can, it kind of makes sense, right? Because you've got this massive collapse of the rainforest, and I would wager that you would initially see a spike in Arthroplura, followed by just complete decimation.
There's also a problem where as climates become arid, it becomes harder and harder for myriapods to survive because unlike, say, insects or arachnids, they don't have a waxy cuticle. So they are actually very prone to water loss. That's one of the reasons why in the desert, centipedes only come out at night because they desiccate less quickly.
So around this time, have us and Dapper already diverged, or are we still the same species?
By this point in the Carboniferous, there's been a split between sauropsids and synapsids.
Yeah.
Although if you were to look at both of them, they would just look like vaguely similar, actually very similar organisms, and you would have to open them up to tell if there was really any difference.
Okay.
Which is one of the things you see. Things that we now think of as very different groups of organisms. As you go back in time to see closer and closer to their divergence point, they become more and more similar looking. And they all basically just kind of looked like lizards. They all had probably soft eggs. They probably all had some kind of primitive scutes or scales.
Mm-hmm. So we were still brothers around this time.
Yeah, basically, if you had seen a primitive sauropsid and a primitive synapsid together, you would not have thought of them as vastly different organisms. They would have just been, oh, here are a couple of those, amniotes, and they would have been largely indistinguishable except to a specialist. This array of amniotes living at the time.
I didn't know that about the myriapods. That myriapods.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I didn't know that the waxy cuticle thing would have also contributed to their demise.
Yeah, that makes a good bit of sense. It explains too why your biggest myriapods are found, like your massive, like, you guys know this, but I spent a summer in Thailand in like 2017, and God, the centipedes, they're like that long, and the millipedes are just as big and as thick around as like a beer bottle neck. I mean, they're just massive, and I guess that makes a good bit of sense, right? Because if you're trying to keep a massive body hydrated, you're probably going to want to live in a place that has monsoon season for like 6 months out of the year.
Terrestrial isopods have the same problem. That's why you tend to find them under rotting logs, because rotting logs give off a lot of moisture and absorb a lot of moisture during rain. So yeah, there's basically outside of insects and arachnids, the only terrestrial arthropod that has ever really figured out a good way to stop desiccation in the long term has basically been the coconut crab.
Yeah.
That checks out.
Yeah, I literally just found about this time period only a few months ago when that PBS Eon made their video.
Oh, they did do that, didn't they? Yeah, I like PBS Eons. It's a good channel. If anyone watching isn't already subscribed to PBS Eons, just go fix that.
Eon's
Seriously.
awesome.
All right, so have we? Are the rainforests dead now? Time to move on.
Yep, rainforests have completely died.
Get out of here, rainforests.
And they're still dying now.
Bring the arid.
Well, again, they've come back a few times since.
Of course, this time
Pangea.
it wasn't our fault. I think.
No, yeah, you can't blame this on any of the synapsids running around. They had nothing to do with it.
And the big one.
Yep.
So now we reach the Permian Triassic extinction, the great dying, the worst mass extinction Earth has ever faced. It happened about 252 million years ago and resulted in 70% of terrestrial life going extinct, as well as 96% of marine species at a minimum. So that's looking at approximately 57% of all families and 83% of all genera. Now, there is debate as to whether or not it happened in 2 or 3 pulses, but it was definitely not one event. There could possibly have been 1 or more large bolide impacts, which triggered things. Then you had the eruption. I messed this up. I'm sorry. The Siberian traps, the Siberian Deacon traps is a mixing. My bad. But the Siberian trap supervolcanoes did go off, and we know they contributed to it.
So what is a bolide impact?
Bolide is a general term for like space debris. So like comets, asteroids, or sorry, comets, meteors, those kind of things.
Good question.
Yeah. Yeah. You'll generally hear the term bolide. I mostly got that from a paper by Carol Cleland when she was discussing the Alvarez hypothesis, which comes up later. But anyways, so evidence for any sort of impact is actually very spotty. There were claims of shocked quartz crystals from the appropriate strata, but these claims did not actually hold up. When they used more recent technology to look at these samples, they found that they actually were experiencing plastic deformation, not any sort of impact shocking. A crater would be a smoking gun for the impact, and there are several known from the late Permian, but they're not dating to the appropriate time period, at least not to have any substantial impact on the extinction event. And there's also the problem of if there was an impact this long ago, we're dealing past 200 million years. And with 70% of the Earth being water, that means there was a 70% chance that any potential impact crater from this event would have been on the ocean floor and would have been subducted and destroyed. So now that's not a complete excuse, because we also haven't found any sort of iridium or other astronomical isotope anomaly to support it either. And again, that doesn't completely disprove it, because not all extraterrestrial objects are rich in these elements, but a lot of them are, and it would be very weird to not find shocked quartz or tektites or a crater or iridium for these all to be false negatives if it actually happened. That's just weird to consider. So it looks like an impact didn't really have a whole lot to do with it. But if you go to the next slide, we can get to the major cause of this event. So one of the largest known flood basalts from the Siberian trap supervolcanoes, covering over 2 million square kilometers, indicates an eruption of these trap volcanoes was a major driver for the Great Dying. The date of the trap eruptions and the extinction events are in excellent agreement with each other. Now, the characteristics of sorry, I praised it the Deacon traps, I meant to put the Siberian. Of the Siberian trap flood basalts reveals just how deadly these eruptions would have been. Normally, pure flood basalts don't produce a lot of atmospheric ejecta. They tend to just produce low viscosity, very fluid, very glassy lava. However, by looking at the Siberian traps, they seem to have had over 20% of their output be in the form of pyroclastic debris hurled into the atmosphere. This would have sparked short-term but intense global cooling. Further evidence shows that the basalt lava intruded into carbonate rocks and sediments containing coal, causing a massive outgassing of sequestered CO2. Evidence has been found that intruding basalt lavas called massive coal beds to literally ignite, similar to like the Transylvania fires that are still burning underground today, releasing more than 3 trillion tons of carbon into the atmosphere. After the debris from the eruption settled, the global cooling would have ended and would have instead been hit with a massive spike in global warming.
Yeah, I think that I finished my script for my Permian video quite some time ago, and I really think the fact that an area the size of the continental United States just straight up detonated. I mean, if you were a synapsid bearing witness to this occurring, you would just have seen the countryside blown
Blow
to
up.
smithereens.
Would have been the most intense game of The Floor is Lava ever played.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
There are a lot of hypotheses too, because there are weird signatures in the Permian, right? I mean, we find this crazy like drop in pH, likely due, at least what I've seen, is it's likely due to the fact that all of that CO2 just being straight up blasted into the atmosphere would have caused these crazy super acid rainstorms.
Mhm.
And really damage the ability of organisms that create calcium carbonate to do so. So you're seeing this massive wipeout of pretty much anything in the ocean that has a shell, which is going to cause ecosystem collapse in the seas.
That's why 96% of the species died.
Yeah.
So this one, for the first time, instead of glaciering killing things off, now we have heat
Now we've
wave.
got massive volcanism. Yep. And believe it or not, this wasn't the only thing. There was, if you go to the next slide, there was another factor that contributed to the demise of this our thing. One of the other factors of the Great Dying was an apparent massive increase of methane in the oceans. So scientists have found worldwide evidence of a swift decrease of about 1% of the delta 13 reading, which is the ratio of 13 carbon to 12 carbon, in carbonate rocks from the end Permian. Outcrops of deep water methane ice, which naturally form on the ocean floor, have the potential to cause such a massive global shift in the carbon cycle. I know 1% doesn't seem like a lot, but when you're doing it on a global scale, it's an incredible amount of change. So the area covered by lava from the Siberian traps eruptions is about twice as large as originally thought, and most of the additional area was shallow sea, up near the top of where near Siberia used to be. And this probably caused methane hydrate deposits and the lava, or methane hydrate at the bottom, which is the methane ice, to dissociate, releasing vast quantities of methane into the ocean as they were heated up by the lava pouring into the sea. Now, there is an alternative to this hypothesis, which is that intermittent periods of ocean bottom hyperoxia and anoxia, which is basically too much oxygen and too little, may have had the same effect on the carbon cycle. And these anoxia excursions do actually show up in oxygen and carbon isotopes at the extinction boundary. So we do know that anoxia did play a role here too, but that could also have been caused by the methane spike. So there's really no way to distinguish between the two, and the methane seems to have more support.
So were we mammals yet this time, or is this still before mammals?
So under most definitions of mammals, the answer is no. One of the things is that exactly what counts as a mammal is slightly up in the air. I tend to favor a definition that is essentially crown mammals, which would basically mean that the common ancestor of, say, the platypus and humans, and all of its descendants would be mammals. But anything more basal than that would be, like a mammaliform.
Maybe like cynodonts or something.
So there were cynodonts. There were definitely cynodonts at the end Permian. The synapsids were probably best represented in the therapsids, including things like Gorgonopsidae, dicynodonts, cynodonts. Dicynodonts actually would continue. They survived into the Triassic, and for the first few million years of the Triassic, they constituted something like 90% of all terrestrial vertebrate biomass were dicynodonts. It was ridiculous. But cynodonts are actually the group to which mammals belong, and they did not really evolve into true mammals, depending on how you define it, either into the Jurassic or maybe the earliest Cretaceous. It's going to depend on, like I said, exactly how you define it. If you want to go with a looser definition where some things that are basal to crown mammals can count, then it pushes it back. But there's some contention about whether or not cynodonts had mammary glands, or they probably had fur. They probably didn't have external ears like mammals do. So it's tricky because a lot of the things that we think of as mammals don't fossilize well.
And what about your side? Did your sides have split from the lizards yet? To the archosaurs, have they split yet?
So lizards haven't evolved at this point. However, Lepidosauria and Archosauria have already diverged, and there are already that's actually during the Triassic we have definite Lepidosaurs and Archosaurs splits. But that is from like the earliest Triassic, so it would have had to have happened by the end Permian. Otherwise, how would you have had that split appearing immediately in the Triassic? So, for instance, we have Archosauromorpha in the instances of things like the very early Triassic. We have things like Sauropterygians, or almost certainly Archosauromorphs. You get things like very early Archosauromorphs, like what am I trying to think of? Like phytosaurs and things like that, very early in the Triassic. So while we don't have a lot of fossil evidence for the exact time of the split, we do think it's probably near the end Permian. And we also know that turtles had started to diverge. And a lot of the current thinking says that turtles are probably closer to Lepidosauria than they are to Archosauria, rather than being basal to either, which means that we would have had, if that actually turns out to be true, then we would have had the sort of Archosaur Lepidosaur split by this time.
And was this when your family started making their rise, or was that the next extinction?
So dinosaurs do not happen until true dinosaurs don't happen until fairly well into the Triassic. You have a whole lot of dinosauromorphes and dinosauriformes like Lagosuchus and other things that were almost Scleromochlus, things like this. These are things that are like, they're really close to being dinosaurs, but they aren't. Mostly that comes down to details of the hip anatomy, believe it or not.
Because I wasn't sure if this is the time when synapsids lost their reign yet.
So the synapsids, so most synapsids groups go extinct at the end of the Permian. Basically, what comes through are cynodonts and dicynodonts, and then dicynodonts do not last very long. They have an initial enormous radiation right after the end of the Permian. They are basically the only good-sized herbivores to survive, and they start to dominate. But one of the problems is that synapsids aren't super great at keeping themselves hydrated. Synapsids have very glandular skin, and they do things like they sweat and they secrete waxy substances, which requires water to build fats. You know, in order to build a long fat molecule, you have to insert water molecules essentially. And so all of this ends up taking up a lot of water, and also they don't have a very water efficient excretion system. Mammals urinate in a form of very watery urine, with very few exceptions, camels being one of the only exceptions. Whereas diapsids don't have a lot of these things. They tend to have aglandular skin, so they're not secreting anything from their skin.
Keep on bragging about your skin.
Well, I mean, it doesn't help a lot except in arid conditions. But like sauropsids also tend to have, rather than releasing urea, they release primarily uric acid in a sort of paste. Is that white stuff that you get when you see bird droppings on your car? That's essentially how a bird does its analog of urination, and so that was common, almost certainly very basally to Sauropsida, because that's a common thing that you see it in turtles and lizards and snakes, in birds and crocodiles. So one of the advantages that the Sauropsid had was that they had a very high ability to retain what water they could take in, and the Triassic is dominated by deserts. And so that's one of the reasons that you see archosauriforms and archosauromorphs and just kind of explode out. They take up almost every niche is taken up by something that's closer to a dinosaur or a lizard than it is to anything else you're familiar with.
So Tony, Erica, you have any points about this subject, about this time period? Any notes?
I have nothing to add. I'm sitting here listening and fascinated. That's all I gotta say.
It's some cool stuff. I I was looking into while Dapper was speaking about mammals, I knew Morganocodon or Meganocodon, however you pronounce it, was hanging around in the early Triassic. So I was thinking, all right, if we find it decently early in the Triassic, and for those of you out there who might not know, Morganocodon is it's just a shrew looking thing.
Well, that's every early mammal.
Yeah, we know it might not even be a mammal. It might be like a sister, like a sister group, because we know it still laid eggs. But they would have been quite leathery, very similar to like monotremes eggs today. And I don't know that we have its inner ears either, so I don't know that we can actually see if it's got the classic mammal orientation of the auditory ossicles.
Right.
But it's got heterodontia, and we find some pretty cool specimens of it where it's basically, it looks like it's just been smashed like a Looney Tune, and you can see all of its fur sticking out. It's a hairy little critter. But I was thinking about it, and I was kind of wondering, because we know that like Dapper said, we know the cynodonts made it through, and we know that Morganocodon exists fairly early in the Triassic, which potentially suggests something quite similar managed to make it through the Permian, potentially.
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, it would be itself a cynodont because mammals are cynodonts.
Right.
So, but it's hard to say exactly how, because one of the problems we have is the earliest that we see something in the fossil record is very unlikely to be the earliest it existed on Earth.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. That's why I'm thinking if we find it,
it's
probably had it in the Permian.
Now, Morganocodon, I can never say the word. Whatever. That form is almost certainly not a crown mammal. So if we go with the sort of restrictive crown mammal being the definition for mammal, then it's not a mammal. But like I've said, mammalia is one of those things that there's still different. You'll find different papers using different definitions for mammalia. Some of them will say, we'll include the triconodonts, and some papers are like, no, it has to be crown mammals. And then some will say, well, what about, and it's a little tricky. It's kind of like the problem with birds. Like, are enantiornithines birds? Well, not if you count crown birds, but if you're going to be a little bit broader with that, like what if we say highly derived flight adapted birds? We could just include enantiornithines in aves. I mean, they're the next closest thing. So it's one of those problems where we've developed these terms with respect primarily to modern animals. But when we look back into the past and we see they're close relatives, but that aren't really part of the group that's still alive, you get this question: what do you call it? Yeah. And I don't have a good answer, and no one's going to ask me for a good answer anyway, because I'm not the one who gets to decide that.
So this picture mean that we were already drinking for oil back then?
Yeah, clearly. Now, see, this was Noah's ancient kids finding the supplies to build the ark.
That's what they used for pitch, right? They combined it with all that evil Canaanite genetic.
I love how. I'm sorry to go off topic, but I'm buzzed and this is bothering me. The people who argue, oh well, you can make pitch from pine sap, and maybe that's what it was talking about, has to completely ignore the context that if you remove this nonsense assumption of the pre-flood world was not what we have now, and they weren't just imagining the world as it is today being flooded, the Middle East is full of oil deposits that just kind of bubble up. And so somebody building an ark, if everything we see in the fossil record was already there pre-flood, would be able to find oil for his boat. So it's just an added assumption that, oh, maybe it would, sure, maybe in its historical and archaeological context, it's talking about, actual oil from the ground, but what if it was just talking about pitch from pine trees? In which case I have to ask how pine trees survived the flood, or was it some sort of pre-flood kind?
Well, I mean, an olive tree apparently survived the flood. I don't know.
No, listen, there is an excellent paper out there that I need to dig up for you guys. And I definitely still have it lurking somewhere in my notes, because I have, my creationist busting notes section in my computer. There's this excellent paper where some individuals, I think they were botanists, were kind of like, all right, let's, and I don't know if they were actually intending to go forth and roast the Noachian deluge or not, but they're basically like, let's do an experiment. Like, let's see how long a a seed, just a seed, if I'm remembering correctly, from an olive tree can survive just completely submerged in water. And if I remember correctly, it made it like 3 months or something like that before it was completely unusable with a 0% survival rate.
But Erica, what you're forgetting is that it could be floating on one of the Texas-sized vegetation mats.
Oh, the ones that were being absolutely nuked by lightning storms to create the Carboniferous coal deposits.
Did they test how many lightning strikes it could survive? No.
And, and honestly, like, we could sit here all day and indulge each and every minute problem.
Fuck me.
Noah's flat.
Honestly, I want to do that someday. We should do that.
We should, and honestly, we'll just
end that hurts.
With the big boy, which is how the hell do you get 4.8 billion years of plate tectonics into a single year?
How does Andrew Snelling sit here and tell me that the pre-flood continent was from the Precambrian, and every supercontinent between then and now formed and broke apart?
Doesn't he say it was Rodinia or something?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
And they're ignoring all the ones that came before Rodinia.
It's totally wild. It's one of the things.
I have to get back to doing the video soon on Genesis apologetics, and some people believe in continental sprint. No, they don't. And I've got a clip from Baumgartner himself, the guy who came up with it, saying, "If God does not solve my physical improbabilities, we have nothing to escape them."
Yeah. Woodmarap said the same thing about, I think it was Woodmarap.
Woodmarap is not a human being. I revoke his human rights. I'm sorry.
Speaking of pines, were they around at this time yet or not?
Conifers?
Conifers?
I don't think so, but I'm actually not sure.
Okay. I know flowering plants came in the Cretaceous.
Right.
Or the very late Jurassic. I think we might have some evidence for them, at least the very basal ones.
I'm extremely skeptical on that one, but I can't dismiss it outright.
Well, we used to say the same thing about grass, and then we found dinosaur coprolites from the Cretaceous with grass pollen. So
no,
you can find traces.
I don't think. Did we find pollen or did we find phytolites?
I believe it was pollen from grass. I'm pretty sure.
Interesting.
It was very, very late Cretaceous, though. Like, we're talking like right before the extinction happened.
Yeah, the grass almost certainly evolved in South America at the very end Cretaceous.
My argument with creationists is always about practical application, and one of the things about this, when it comes to debating whether it's a worldwide flood or the evolution, I guess you could say the uniformitarianism view of the world, is which one is useful. And I'm always asking, why is it that we can use uniformitarianism to discover where oil deposits are going to be?
Yeah, and why isn't Zion oil?
Time again,
we never use creationism.
Creationists will never address facies modeling. It was one of the death blows to any hope of flood geology being a real scientific part of geology. And the reason is the very fact that when I work for an oil company and I have to figure out where are we going to find our oil deposits, all I have to do is look at some exposed outcrops on the surface, use my knowledge of marine transgressions to figure out what rocks below that I haven't ever drilled into, that I don't know what's down there, but I'm predicting what is down there, what its extent will be, what its hydrocarbon content will be, based solely on age and paleo environment. The two things that a flood would completely invalidate, and yet I get it right.
So is that why Zion Oil isn't the wealthiest oil company in the world?
Exactly. And there is no reason that facies modeling should work even once if its only inputs are completely wrong. If the global flood happened, I mean, it just doesn't make sense. The fact that we can successfully predict not just where oil deposits are, but even when they fail, we can say, well, this area looks like that, 400 feet down, it was probably a desert. Well, it's like, well, let's see if we got that model right. Oh, hey, look at that Aeolian sand. Wow. Perfect.
Yeah, Colton, I actually used that in a discussion with someone. Actually, it was Bill Morgan, Dapper D, who I brought that up to. I was like, the entire
Oh yeah.
I was like, let's consider for a moment the fact that one of the biggest industries in human economics, right? The fuel and energy industry, the guys who are going out there and drilling for oil and natural gas and things like that, use time scales and data that are not just rooted in, but exclusively rooted in predictions made by evolutionary theory and conventional geology to find their caches, I guess, of oil and things of that nature, is evidence that this is legitimately applicable to the degree that billions upon billions, trillions even, of dollars rest on it.
The only argument I have ever heard against FACES modeling is that we just don't report all the times it fails, and that we're only looking at the coincidences. It's the same nonsense that
every dry well is a huge hit to an oil company, though. Like, they can't afford to just drill dry wells all the time.
No, exactly.
And then you have like Andrew Snelling or Tim Clary going on about how, oh, well, you don't need to do that to find oil, so it doesn't matter. Like, yeah, I can take an ultrasonic imager and just scroll over the ground if I wanted to until I hit an oil deposit, but that's wasting time. So the ones we do use do require you know how old the rock is and the environment it's faced and its history.
It's sort of like, it's kind of like, you could, dig this ditch with earth movers or spoons. I guess technically, yes, you can dig a ditch with a spoon, but no one's going.
Why would you?
Right. It's the same. It's like, I know that you can ignore the science and just do it the slowest possible, least efficient way that will get you, reasonably good results.
Hey,
but
maybe
no one's doing it.
Maybe you'll get lucky like Jeb Clampett did and shoot a bullet through a.
Yeah, and oil will just bubble up. Yeah, I guess it's not impossible, right?
I'm sorry to rant.
No. I looked it up, by the way. We've got pine trees in the late Carboniferous.
There you go. I guess there. Wow.
Pinophyta.
So, Triassic-Jurassic extinction. About 201.3 million years ago, 60% of plants died, as evidenced by the pollen assemblages of the Triassic-Jurassic boundary.
Speaking of plants.
Yeah. So this one seems to have done a real toll on the floral ecosystem. It happened over about a 10,000 year period, which is very quick geologically speaking, resulted in about 76% of all marine and terrestrial species going extinct, which is somewhere on the order of 20% of all taxonomic families, and thought to be what allowed dinosaurs to rise to dominance.
Your time is now, Dapper.
Well, not so quite yet. I have to wait a little bit.
It was likely caused by extensive volcanism. There are many basalt lava flows which correlate to the Triassic-Jurassic boundary that would have had massive impacts on the carbon cycle. It's the same thing that we've seen time and time again.
Was this the time that the continents got their divorce?
Oh God, I can't remember. I don't think Pangea was split up by now. I don't think.
During the Jurassic, you kind of get the north-south split between
but not quite yet.
Yeah, it's well, of course, it's a slow process the whole way through. So
yeah, it's not like there's going to be a sharp dividing line.
So it's the child separation, not divorce yet.
Right. Yeah.
This is where we're starting to have some marital discord, and the husband's been caught browsing the MGTOW subreddit because he hates his wife.
God. Brain cells.
But yeah. So there is also the potential that a bolide impact may have had some say on it or some cause on it, but there hasn't been an appropriate crater found. And then we move on to the most well-known that's talked about in basically all books on paleo history is the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction.
Where Dapper's family lost their control.
This is where Dapper. This is spoilers. You may want to live in ignorance of this one.
Hey, you know what? Go fight a cassowary, man. Go fight a cassowary. That's all I got.
Okay. So during the Cretaceous Paleogene extinction, about 66 million years ago, 75% or more of all species on Earth died. Dinosaur fossils stop appearing abruptly below this boundary, and for a long time, nobody knew why. There were a lot of hypotheses. Some thought there was a pandemic, which may have caused an ecological collapse, such as disrupting the food chain. Volcanoes, like we'd seen before, were thought to probably be a severe cause of this.
So
or maybe there was a meteor impact, but nobody really knew.
So it was COVID 66 million BC.
Yeah, COVID negative 66 MYA. I'm sure that was probably it probably would have attacked the plants or something like that. But anyways, nobody knew which of these hypotheses could have been responsible until we get to the Alvarez company.
Yep.
Move to the next one. The Alvarez hypothesis. So in the 1980s, this is great father-son bonding. I assume, and I wish I could do it too. Physicist Luis Alvarez, along with his son geologist Walter Alvarez, and along with chemists Frank Acero and Helen Vaughan Mitchell, set out to try and figure out how long the KPG boundary took to actually form. So at the time, they knew there was a weird boundary between the two periods, but they really didn't know what its duration was. And so that was the goal here. Now, when they tested it, they found that all of the samples had a high concentration of a rare earth element known as iridium, which was hundreds of times greater than normal earth levels. And this element, iridium, is very rare on Earth, and it can only generally be concentrated by giant volcanic eruptions. However, while that could be an explanation, there was not one on the North American continent that seems like it could have been responsible. So they had another idea, which was that maybe a meteor had brought this iridium to Earth. Now, bolides such as meteors and comets are not always rich in iridium, but they have been known to carry high concentrations of it in at least some of them. And if one of these hit the Earth, it would easily leave a mark of iridium in the geologic record.
Yeah, this is interesting because this one here it's very recently in our basically
very recently in
our
geologic
lifetime,
history,
it was discovered.
Yeah, and it's very recent. It wasn't that long ago.
Because I remember
like
in the
20 years.
80s, reading books in the 80s about this before this was discovered. They were still talking about how dinosaurs were in like slow stuff and like that, and
So much has been discovered since then.
yeah.
So, anyways, they had this idea that it was a meteor impact, and they sought to find more evidence to support such an idea.
Yeah, were they like still fought against back then, like people that believe that?
Yeah, a lot of people were leaning towards the volcano idea, and they didn't really take the iridium anomaly too seriously, because while there was some question as to whether or not a volcano on the North American continent could have been responsible, I'm not sure if Yellowstone was really a thing then. But there was always the possibility that there could have been a massive caldera which just didn't survive. Yeah, and so it wasn't completely out of
the question. Well, people didn't accept the continental drift theory at first either.
No, continental drift was a thing by then. It was accepted in the 60s.
I mean, when it first happened, people first proposed that they didn't.
I'm not sure.
By the 80s, in the 80s, continental drift had long since, by long,
it was in the 50s.
Yeah.
Yeah,
so
I think he's just suggesting that very similar to the Alvarez hypothesis, where it was kind of like, maybe, but
maybe it was something on a different continent. Okay, right. Yeah, maybe.
And then later on, everyone was like, wait a second.
Yeah.
So anyway, but they were convinced that there may have been a meteor impact, and on the next one, you'll see that they actually were able to support that very well. So they began making predictions about what key evidences one would expect a large impact to produce. By figuring out their smoking guns, what their smoking guns should look like, and by making several, they could test the impact hypothesis. After all, it would be unlikely for multiple key traces to all be degraded and result in false negatives, or for a competing theory to somehow produce nothing but false positives. So they were very thorough in what they laid out. Some of these predictions included the fact that an iridium anomaly from a major meteorite impact, if it could cause a global extinction, should be global in extent. In other words, there should be evidence of the impact there should be evidence of this iridium anomaly worldwide. An impact would also cause worldwide ejecta, otherwise the iridium couldn't spread. And so things like shocked quartz and tektites, which are, I'm sorry, I didn't finish that, which were they're these little glass beads that cause from just the sheer heat of the eruption. They get blasted into the atmosphere and then they cool off. And they look like little teardrops. So those should be found in the iridium layer as well. There's no reason to expect a giant volcano to do this on a worldwide scale. And finally, one of their most crucial predictions was that a crater should be present somewhere on Earth dating to the right time period. As being the impact happened only 66 million years ago, the chance of subduction destroying a crater would be significantly reduced. And all of these predictions came out true. They tested over 50 sites around the world and found iridium anomalies present at each at a very homogeneous level. They found tektites and shocked quartz all over inside this iridium anomaly as well. They found the crater on the Yucatan Peninsula firmly dating to the right age and also correlating with giant tsunami deposits found all the way on the North and South American continents. Every one of their predictions came out successful. Now, the success of the Alvarez hypothesis in locating its predicted traces earned it widespread acceptance in the scientific community. There is very little doubt that the impact was the death blow to the dinosaurs. Now, there is some debate as to if the Deacon traps over in India may have weakened the ecosystem in sort of a 1-2 punch. We know that from right before the impact, they were releasing lots of lava, but I don't know how sure of that people are at this point.
Yeah, it's one of the problems is it seems to be a little bit uneven in various end Cretaceous deposits. You get some that seem like there may have been some loss of biodiversity leading up to that point, but then you get others where it seems like everything was just going on swimmingly. Like
So
like
it looks like some places might have been weakened.
Yeah, like if you look at say like the Hell Creek deposit, which is like the last like 3 million years of the Cretaceous, it's like right up to the very end. There's no big indication that there's anything wrong with that ecosystem. It's a thriving ecosystem full of multiple herbivores, various predators of various sizes. You've got birds, you've got crocodiles, you've got alligators, you've got turtles, fish, T-Rexes there. You've got just all sorts of, you've got mammals the size of small dogs. You've got lizards, you got things that are like Gila monsters that are the size of like a large dog, which is kind of scary. Mm-hmm. But like, you got snakes. Everything seems to be just going swimmingly, and then suddenly nothing. You get an iridium layer and it's just gone.
Yep.
So it's
now another interesting thing. This was actually found out, I believe, only a few years ago. In examining a lot of these sites right when the iridium started to be deposited around the world, they find a lot of water lily pollen, which indicates that this impact event didn't just occur 66 million years ago, but happened during the summertime. That was a fairly recent discovery. So everything was calm and peaceful, and life was thriving, and it was this beautiful sort of summer ecosystem with flowers everywhere, and then death comes from the sky.
That's wild.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
So which Cretaceous was it that said this asteroid here was the cause of the flood?
No, none of them have said this one was the cause of the flood.
Yeah, I'm not aware.
Michael Ord believes that a massive bombardment because Michael Ord's one of these weirdos who thinks that all the Precambrian is flood rock too.
Oh God.
He thinks the late heavy bombardment was what caused the flood.
Oh goodness. What were people standing on before the flood?
I don't know. Just massive melts of basalt.
Okay.
And then
about the pre-flood basalt thing that pisses me off is that it's all basement granite, and it's just covered in Archean microfossils.
Not just that. If you look at where like Andrew Snelling thinks the flood happens in the Grand Staircase, where he thinks it's like right at the Tapete Sandstone, the Grand Canyon supergroup beneath that is indistinguishable from the flood deposits. It looks exactly the same. It's the same alternations of sandstone, shale, limestone. There's no difference other than fossil content. Mm-hmm. That's it.
Yeah. It's very strange. I since last night I've grown to appreciate the creationists who at least try to make an effort to explain these things. So when you
you want me to put a globe on my head?
Yeah, you're like
and have major small big energy by saying that if I mock people, that makes them wrong.
I by the 5th or 6th question where someone was like, well, so why, I think someone asked about nematodes that essentially are parasitic in fish eyes. And someone was like, all right, that seems like kind of a weird thing to design intentionally. Why would those have been made? Why are parasites a thing? It's like the classic thorns before the Garden of Eden that AIG likes to tote around as if that's.
You guys give me 2 seconds. Somebody's at the door, and I think it's a package I've been expecting.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, sorry.
No problem. Yeah, but it's wild when you hear someone's genuine response is, I don't know, I guess he just did it that way.
Yeah, it's although speaking of parasites, that's another one of those flood things that you never really hear about. Even in AIG, it's like every single animal on that ark must have been just absolutely riddled with disease and parasites. Otherwise, I mean, is there a flatworm kind? I don't know. Is there a tapeworm kind? Is there a liver fluke kind? Like what? A hookworm? Is there a hookworm kind? Which of Noah's sons brought the hookworms?
I was wondering if this thing was how did Noah and his family survive this giant impact or any impact.
Oh, I mean,
the boat just rode that boy like a big hang 10 wave.
Oh man. Actually, the parasites thing really is a funny one. Like, which of Noah's sons or daughters-in-law had like syphilis? I want to know.
Or what about all the viruses?
Right.
What about our bacteriophages? What about any potential? What about all of our genetic abnormalities? I mean, I know they attribute most of them to genetic entropy, but viruses are very old.
Yeah. I know we have low genetic diversity among humans, but that would be like very, very low.
Yeah, not nearly low enough to have said that there's a 4,000-year-old bottleneck with a population total of essentially 6. Because you say 8, but like, all right, Noah and his wife don't really count it. No one imagines that about a bunch more kids.
But the Y chromosome is the same. There's only one damn Y chromosome that they can have.
Yeah. Here, I'm putting a link in the side chat because I noticed as I'm sure you guys know, Standing for Truth has graced me with his presence. They got their brain trust together and made commentary video on my discussion with G-Man.
Lucky you.
And at one point, Standing is talking about how the reason why he's trying to draw the line between, well, why are house cats and tigers a kind, but humans and chimps aren't, despite the fact that the genetic difference between humans and chimps is several orders of magnitude, more similar than that of house cats and tigers. And he starts kind of going on about how it has something to do with how humans have low genetic diversity. Something to do with that.
What?
I was like, really? I was like,
Except if you check Rational Minds' blog, Evograd, there was a scientific paper which confirmed beyond any reasonable doubt that our genetic diversity is driven by mutations, not by creation of that diversity.
not only that, and I have that paper in my notes because I'm going to respond to that first claim. I already have some of my stuff recorded for that. But I also found an excellent paper that compares the genetic diversity between all of the hominoids, so all of the great apes. And humans are actually, in fact, not just humans, non-African humans are on par with bonobos with our genetic diversity and being quite low. But African humans, like those who live in Central Africa, have incredibly high genetic diversity that's like in the middle of the hominoids. Like it's higher than lowland gorillas and Western chimpanzees. So I think
surprise me that's where we've been the longest.
Oh, pardon me, I missed that.
It doesn't surprise me. That's where we've been the longest.
No,
Right. Yeah.
Precisely, yeah. And so I thought that was interesting though, because I was like, that it's always with kind of Standing and his gang over there. It's always what's the latest single tack that we can pin everything on.
I can't take them seriously because that damn book you sent me of their flood model, they start talking about how there clearly must have been some form of granite clay that the flood made, so that way granite formations could be carved out by human tools and that it was still soft. They just outright state granite isn't igneous, that's fake.
Colton, I want more than anything. I will set it up myself.
Sorry.
I would love for you to have a conversation with Standing about geology. I will do my best to set that up if you want to.
I don't even want to make it a debate.
have
I want to make it just a one-to-one discussion because I forget any formal debate format. I just want to talk. I can't get over this granite clay nonsense.
I'm going to set it up. I'm going to send him an email right now.
Okay.
I've been talking to him for a while about how you can resolve the idea that you accept the idea of genetic entropy, but you reject the idea of junk DNA. How can you
true.
do one and not the other? I mean,
yeah, well,
yeah, one would explain the other, and I still don't. At this point in time, I don't understand
it's
why
called
he's making
creation
that
of
argument.
tunnel vision. Any argument which could support evolution has to be debunked, even if our responses to those arguments contradict each other. That's creationist tunnel vision. It's a thing.
But what's the ultimate result of genetic entropy? It has to be junk DNA. It has
I don't know. This discussion with Standing is just going to turn into me talking about the Surprise Canyon formation. I hope you know that.
Yes.
It's what I'm familiar with.
Listen, that's what I'm anticipating. But I'm sending him this email. I'm vouching for you. You got to keep your cool if you're going to debate him, or he's going to get mad that I set you guys up.
Okay.
So are
I want it
cheetahs?
to be a formal discussion. Don't make it some like actual debate format.
No, it's just a discussion. Just a discussion.
Speaking of genetic diversity, are cheetahs still the least diverse things on Earth right now? Or
No, I'm not sure.
They're very low. I don't know how you would demonstrate that they're the least diverse. I mean, you'd have to do a lot more genetic sequencing to make that determination. But they are exceptionally low. They basically don't have organ rejection problems between cheetahs. So which, I mean, even among the relatively low genetic diversity non-African humans, you get high rates of organ rejection. Even among close family who should have the highest rates of acceptance, you still, like if your parent or sibling donates an organ, there's still a very good chance that you're going to have to be on immunosuppressants for the rest of your life in order to not reject that organ.
Not with cheetahs, though.
Yeah, any two random cheetahs, you can swap patches of skin. They'll just be just fine.
and from what I remember, that's only like 10,000 years ago, let alone 4,000 years ago with the flood.
Erica, see if Standing's free tonight. I don't even need time to prepare for this. I just want to talk.
I'll check it out. I just sent an email. I'll follow up real fast.
It's not that's fine. I know it's Easter. I know it's probably important.
You're gonna
I've got a nice buzz going where I can remain calm.
say if you want, you can send him the link to this hangout.
Yeah, why not? Just see if he wants to come in.
It's only Easter for most of the Christians.
Yeah.
For some of them,
Anyways, before we get to that, let's get through the rest of this real quick. So the Quaternary did have an extinction event, which is considered the most recent, excluding the ongoing one that we're causing. And depending on who you talk to, they might actually consider that part of the Quaternary extinction event part of what's going on now, because not everyone accepts the Anthropocene being a thing. But what we see is numerous megafauna die out, things like the mammoths, or the weird, freaky, giant birds of New Zealand, and all sorts of other things. And there was a collapse in faunal diversity and faunal density, which led to the extinction of key ecological strata worldwide. The main causes stem from the combinations of natural climate change due to the recent ice ages that had happened, as well as humans just dominating the ecosystems. Overhunting was a big cause of what brought a lot of this to extinction.
Wait, are you saying that Aboriginal populations the world over didn't just live in harmony with all of the animals and they only took exactly what they needed from nature and they were basically hippies? That wasn't the case?
No, that big animal's scary. Let's kill it and everything like it.
Huh. But wait, how do I go with my postmodernist, deification of Aboriginal populations then? Are you saying that that's
because
not
all humans are savage?
Oh, okay.
It's not that they're better than us. It's that everyone's as bad. That's just how we are.
All right.
We are very fine-haired apes that are very vengeful and
like with veganism and all the moral arguments I hear. And it's like, oh, well, don't you see how these animals suffer? It's like, yeah, that pig is suffering in awful conditions, so that way I can have a tasty breakfast. And I'm sorry, I cannot be asked to care. It's a pig. I know. I don't want it to suffer unnecessarily, like just beating it for the hell of it. But people gotta eat, and I'm not eating plants only, and I'm not eating bugs. I'm sorry, it's not happening. And if animals have to suffer so I can get meat, they're gonna suffer.
I have like 4 mealworms in my refrigerator right now.
Are they for you?
No, they're for my pets.
That's what I thought.
Actually,
because I got a bunch of mealworms too. My gecko, he loves his mealworms. Okay? Milo loves his mealworms.
I'm actually allergic to them. So all these people who are like, "Oh, we'll just eat mealworm protein," because that's a proposition.
What makes them any lesser?
But Dapper, we know your teeth was used to eat watermelons.
Of course.
Yeah, watermelons. Yeah, before the flood, I ate watermelons because I'm a antediluvian, and ever since the flood, apparently my digestive tract has shrunk considerably. I don't understand how that happens. That's another one of those things. Like, so did T-Rex have a long digestive tract?
If Standing wants to talk to me, that's fantastic. But if he can't do it tonight, because again, I don't want to make it some formal thing. That just isn't my style.
Nah, he didn't require that. Standing, listen.
Okay.
You can,
Okay,
you can say a lot about Standing. I disagree with pretty much everything that he has to say with regard to anything, even tangentially related to biology. But I've had nothing but pleasant conversations with him, and I should have appreciated what I had when I had it, because after
because last night was rough.
Dumpster fire.
Was that your first Nathan Thompson debate that you'd even seen?
I didn't even know who the guy was.
Yeah,
he was very.
See, I would have warned you had that not already been scheduled before I even knew about it. I was just like, Ben Tobin and I both saw that, and we were just like, I wonder if she knows what she's getting into.
I wouldn't have believed you, because I would have been like, hey, you said that with G-Man, but that was fine. And then it turned out I was
wrong about G-Man. I was very wrong about G-Man. I will admit it.
No, but the thing is that it's like I've never in my life come to a point where I genuinely have no idea what they're asking for.
Yeah. Well,
it wasn't even obfuscation. It wasn't like I knew what they were asking for, but it's impossible. I had no idea. I could not tell you.
My favorite question and your answer to it was, do you think you could teach Austin what that evolution is about, like changes in allele frequency over time? You're just like, no, I don't think I could.
Listen, I know it's mean.
Where's my living species today?
I stand by that. If you gave me 5 hours, I don't know that I would be able to.
I think we broke Tony.
You know what y'all missed? Y'all missed an opportunity. You know how your partner brought up the coelacanth?
Yes.
Okay. That is a representative of a transition between lobe-finned fish and tetrapods. That entire group is thought to be very close. That could have been a key point to say, look, this is what the transition would look like. And boy, there it is. There it is. It's still alive today. You got one.
Here's the thing.
Hey, Tony, man, you alive? You give us a wave?
Here's the thing, though, Colton.
Everything's
a transition. That's what I was trying to say. I was like, all right, so either the question is, what specific transitions exist between Sahelanthropus and modern humans? Or the question is, where are the transitionals today? To which the answer is, it's all transitional.
Here's the thing. If your response is, like, I'm not going to tell you what I would expect evidence for your position to be, then you're not having a serious conversation. Now, like, I can give a vague idea of what a transitional is, although it's probably wrong because just that's not my strong suit. But like, if creationists are like, okay, maybe there's some erosion between the strata, but it's not enough. Okay, what would enough look like?
Yeah, no, precisely.
What would enough look like? Can you tell me what it is so I can give you an example? Or are you just going to keep telling me that any example of buried paleo valleys I give you is just not enough?
Here's the thing. I couldn't tell, like, between the two of them, I definitely think Austin was less disingenuous. Because I don't think Nathan was there to do anything but act as an antagonist, which, whatever, that's fine. Like, I'm not about to get pissed off at a grown man wearing a globe on his head and dancing around and doing crybaby faces at the camera, just because, the only loss is my time. But I
think Tony fell asleep.
Yeah. Actually, Tony, are you there?
Tony.
You call the ambulance?
Oh.
He's okay.
Okay.
You're
alive.
We weren't sure if you were asleep or
dead
or
COVID got you.
You're right, man?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm just listening.
Okay. Yeah, I looked over. I'm like, Tony. And then I looked at like the stream, and he just kind of collapsed backwards. And I was like, maybe Tony isn't okay.
No, I'm okay. I'm just listening.
Yeah, really fast. Says Erica, since this is your time period of your study, how are the primates extinctions going around this time?
Oh man, I mean this entire area, basically from the Cretaceous, depending on who you talk to, if you want to count Purgatorius or not. Some people consider Purgatorius to be sort of a sister group. But we're seeing primates really, really early. Once those arboreal predators disappeared, and there was all that open free real estate for the primates and arboreal mammals in general to kind of seize, and it was a perfect kind of coincidence, right, with flowering plants and fruits. So you've got this perfect selective pressure rather in North America for organisms to be clamoring about in the trees. And very shortly after that, comparatively, like we're talking about 10 million years, which, you know, for something as derived as a primate to come from the mammal group is pretty significant. You're seeing organisms like Aegyptopithecus, like your kind of Cercopithecus species, very similar to like macaques. Like I've got this little mock macaque skull here, if you guys can see that at all. We're seeing that modern dental formula pop up, increase in brain case size. And interestingly enough, we're seeing an appearance of something that is quite characteristic of primates in general, which is sexual dimorphism, both with size and with canine length.
So how many of our primate cousins didn't make this far?
Oh, God. How many primates made it to the quaternary, like the end of the quaternary?
Yeah.
Us and all other extant primates. I mean, you've got your macaques and your mangabeys and your baboons and New World monkeys. And
how many didn't make it? So we're talking about extinction. How many of our
oh
cousins?
God, so many really cool ones. The Miocene is your era of the apes, the actual planet of the apes. You've got some wild looking apes living, very, very specialized actually, living in Europe and in the north of Africa, or the Middle East as well, that we generally consider to be, I mean, pretty unique for their time period. You've got like Dendropithecus, which is this organism that for a long time was deemed to be quite gibbon-like, which just because it had no sexual dimorphism at all, huge canines, very lanky, obviously moved about by brachiation. And then they were like, wait, just kidding. This is actually a completely different branch of our hominoid tree. So, and again, it's very difficult without DNA to place things precisely, but that Miocene era really was a heyday for your apes. And then now we're sort of in the opposite of that, the age of the monkeys, which is cool.
You say, go ahead.
No, that's it. I was done.
I was going to say, when you say the phrase brachiation, all I picture is a giant rock unit shattering. I don't know what that means.
No,
So
yeah.
how,
I'm talking about the cool kind of brachiation where you're swinging through the tree.
Hey!
So how do we resolve the fact that there are New World primates, New World primates, and Old World primates? When did that happen? When did that split happen? It doesn't seem like it happened at a time where the continents were conjoined. So how do we resolve that?
Well, and there was actually a very interesting paper published, I think 5 years ago, something like that, that plotted out what we know about the geography at the time, and indeed where we know these old world monkeys were hanging out, because it would have been, I believe it would have been a parapithecid, which is a very basal old world monkey. Like when I say very basal, I mean, you know, we're talking about just a stretch off of your tarsier forms. Anyway, so the continents were much closer together. So Africa and South America were far closer than they are now. And the estimated time, right, for a rafting event to occur, for an organism to get, like, let's say you're you're unfortunately blown onto a mat of vegetation and set adrift in the ancient Atlantic. It would take you about 11 days to get from Africa to South America. Which, if you're considering what we tend to think of when we think of a rafting event, which is something like the size of my desk in front of me, a sad little log with a couple of twigs on it, it seems quite daunting. But the reality is that this area would have been quite lush, even the area of the Fayum and things like this, and had easy access to water. And because it was so tropical, the thought, and indeed coastal, the thought is that it would have been subject to quite a few impressive storms. So we would see quite large mats of vegetation being blown into the water. So much larger space to deal with, and viable vegetation. So hydration isn't a problem, food isn't a problem, and as long as the seas were calm, they would have made it across with very little issue, given the current of the time. And interestingly enough, when we look at the genetics, we find that split was 30 to 35 is I think what they're going with now. It's either 30, 35 or 35, 40 million years ago. So considering the consistency of those weather patterns, there were probably a lot of attempts before something got there and took as sort of a species. And then we see comparatively very little diversification in South America when compared to Africa and Asia with those New World platyrrhines when compared to the catarrhines.
Yeah, real fast. Like, in this next section, a lot of people know about the kings and the presidents dying, but not very many people know about the peasants dying. Like in these little small.
Yeah, there were a couple of very small minor extinctions that have also happened in between the major ones. I honestly hesitate to call them extinction events as opposed to faunal turnovers because a lot of them just end up with replacement rather than extinction. But for example, like the boundary between the Cambrian and the Ordovician, there's a minor extinction event correlated with oxygen isotope excursion, and it has many species of conodonts and trilobites disappear. And it's a good marker, but they just get replaced by other members of their same family. You got another one that's very similar happening between the Silurian and the Devonian with graptolites. And again, you got more faunal turnover, this time associated with carbon isotopes, likely linked with global cooling events and disrupting the carbon cycle. I mean, we've all seen that before. And then actually the upper boundary of the Paleogene is marked by a global extinction of just foraminifera, microfossils. You see a major turnover of mammal species as well, but you just see a sudden dip in diversity of the little microfossil shell creatures in the marine sediment. But that's about it. I mean, these don't get much attention because they're not that impressive, and they're mostly just sort of a replacement rather than an extinction. But they are marked with like global environmental changes. So they are still worth noting.
Like no one gives them any love.
Yeah.
Well, one of the weird things you get about humans is that humans care a lot more about things the closer they are to being human.
True.
Like everyone's like, oh, there's an endangered little cute mouse or a monkey. Oh, well, let's set up a charity. And it's like, yeah, okay, but this marine nudibranch is also going extinct. People are like, it looks like a cucumber with tentacles. I don't care.
Yeah.
That's basically how it goes. And if you tell them, oh, what about this, microscopic part of the phytoplankton? They're just like, the what now?
Yeah,
Also,
it's very much dependent on how cute something is for how likely it is to be rescued.
Honestly, yeah.
Humanity.
Either cute or how much money it cost us.
True. Yes, true.
Remind me, was Jackson supposed to be on here?
I think
remember.
I don't remember.
I can't remember.
Invite, I guess you can't join.
He might have had work.
No, that's possible.
Nerd. Still having to do actual job during a pandemic.
Gross.
Yeah.
Although I do remember every once in a while when I was in the Navy, when people were talking about the horrible things happening to animals, we tell them the Navy shot thousands or possibly even millions of water slugs every year, which is technically true. It's just that a water slug is a bit of water that you eject from a pipe connected to the ocean. It's not actually an animal. It's a slug in the same way that like a shotgun round that isn't buckshot is a slug. It's just a solid piece of a thing. In this case, it happens to be water. It's a continuous bit of water. But yeah, they still get upset. We also did actually get a crab to grow to adulthood inside of one of our seawater filters because it was able to find. Yeah, unfortunately, the mechanics who found it decided to put it in a bucket, but rather than filling it from a seawater valve, they just filled it with potable water, and then next thing you know, there's a dead crab. It's like,
so
good job, guys.
So besides it's being like lucky, or maybe I don't know, do we know how each of our ancestors survived each of these mass murders?
Oh man, I mean,
I know that for the KPG extinction event that killed the dinosaurs, we were lucky enough to be a lot of burrowing species, and so we just kind of managed to survive the fallout.
That remains true for a lot of them, actually.
And now you've got this repeated cycle of, hey, look, this giant rock almost killed everything, but we survived, and look at all this open space. Or before, hey, look, that whole continent just blew up. Good thing I'm underground.
Yeah.
I think too. There's this idea And for a long time, I did the same thing where it's like, ah, yes, the powerful burrowing mammals. They managed to escape the wrath of the asteroid due to their cunning and adaptability and flexibility. And the reality is, a shit ton of them probably got blown to smithereens or roasted alive as well. It's just more of them survived than other things.
Think about it. If we end up killing ourselves with a nuclear war, bunkers are how we're going to survive. The trend will just continue.
Yeah, being underground, being small, being able to feed off of a large range of food sources, these are all things that help a lot with surviving a mass extinction.
Our stomachs are garbage cans. We can eat anything. We are highly adaptable as omnivores, and that's what makes us and some of the really and truly many of the pest species, organisms that we consider pests, are pests because they're so flexible and readily adaptable.
Yeah, like rats, mice, I can't talk. Raccoons, mice, rats, cockroaches. These are all things that basically, if it's organic, they can digest it.
Many monkeys too. That's why they're they're considered nuisance species in areas where they're endemic. I'm
actually kind of wondering what's going to happen to those Thai temple monkeys. Like, is that troop just going to disperse?
Yeah, they'll be fine. What they'll do is they might have a fission event, kind of similar to dispersion. They'll fission out and spread in their individual troops, and likely just exploit farmland, and many of them will be shot for it, but their troops as individual troops will survive. Okay. And then they'll be very violent for the coming years as they're trying to figure out who is the alpha male and the alpha female.
So how come when Noah and his sons got off the ark, they didn't diversify like everywhere like the mammals did after dinosaurs died?
Well, who are you talking to? I mean, you got some creationists who think that Noah was an Australopithecine.
Oh, God. Ugh.
Wow, I don't think I've heard that one.
I've heard that before. I mean,
Todd Wood.
You've got people like Todd Wood and Kurt Wise saying, "Don't worry, whales just got off the ark and evolved into what they are in 400 years." Yeah. And the only reason they do that, I'm convinced. I mean, I know they don't talk about it because they don't like to talk about it. But again, ecological zonation would predict that whales and marine reptiles, being shallow marine creatures, would be found in the same deposits. There are only two ways out of this. One, whales weren't originally in the ocean and just got off the ark. Or two, you can do what Ariel Roth did and say that there were somehow massive, isolated upland oceans which kept the marine species separate. I can see why that's not very appealing. So the ark is kind of what you're left with.
Yeah, I've actually asked that question to several creationists, like live, and just say, why don't mosasaurs appear in the same strata as, say, basilosaurids? Because they have essentially
because modern whales, sure, say post-flood diversification, but what about the fossil species?
Yeah, these are two fossil species. They have essentially the same ecological niche. They both prefer shallow water. They both are primarily carnivores that are feeding on fairly large, probably, actually, in many cases, probably other marine tetrapods, or at the very least, very large fish. Some mosasaurs were adapted specifically for, ammonites, but still, why don't these things appear together? There doesn't seem to be any obvious difference in their body density, especially since marine animals tend to be neutrally buoyant on average for very good reason. You don't want to have to fight very hard to dive or rise. So,
ammonites are a whole other thing.
Well, yeah, but
anything that moves up and down in the water column is going to be very problematic.
Right. And one of the things that Eric Hovind says a lot that I really hate is you find clams at the bottom. It's like, yeah, you also find clams at the top. So we're
everywhere in between.
Right. Were some clams really slow bottom dwellers, but others were sprinters who sprinted up the mountains? What is your argument here?
I think
you ever seen One Punch Man? You ever seen Saitama running across the ocean? I mean, same thing.
So they consider clams living fossils or something like that?
I mean,
that's a fair question, actually.
You have a lot of. They don't even consider that. I don't think. What a lot of their arguments are is that clams are found buried closed, which to them indicates that they're fossil deposition or something. But the problem is they're not clams.
Yeah, they're brachiopods in many cases.
Yeah, they're brachiopods, which naturally close up on death.
Yeah, brachiopods, they have to exert muscular action to keep their shells open, whereas bivalves, which are mollusks, they have to exert muscular action to keep their shells closed. And the thing about it is, like, if you just have one shell, it's not always very easy to tell if you have a brachiopod or a bivalve shell, especially if you're not a specialist or anything. But one of the things that you can use to help you tell the difference is that brachiopods have top and bottom shells, right? So their shells are symmetrical from left to right across the shell. So if you have one shell, it'll be symmetrical across an axis going down it. But the top shell and the bottom shell won't be mirror images of each other. One will close into the other because they're top and bottom, and the axis of symmetry goes through the short part of the shell. But mollusks have a left-right symmetry on their shell. So they have a left shell and a right shell. So both shells should be identical to each other except mirror images, which is not the case for brachiopods. So if you find a paired shell and the shells aren't mirror images, you don't have a mollusk. You have a brachiopod.
Which one is oysters?
Oysters are bivalves. Almost every pear-shelled organism in the water that you're familiar with in the modern day is a bivalve. Brachiopod diversity has taken a nosedive. They used to be very diverse and very common throughout, I believe, all the way through the Mesozoic. But then as the Cenozoic comes in, bivalves, and I'm not really sure why, but bivalves tend to dominate all of those same niches, and brachiopods are now, I mean, they're not extinct, but they're far from common. Every shelled organism you've ever eaten has been a bivalve, pretty much, as far as clams, oysters, mussels.
Do each of you have a favorite mass murder extinction?
Mass extinction?
Permian
Even you have a favorite? You guys have a favorite one?
Probably the Permian. I think the Permian is the most interesting just because it's, the Earth has been around for 4.8 billion years, and the one, I mean, granted, we're dealing with about 3.8 billion for life, but still, that's the closest we've come to doing a soft reset for life on planet Earth. And every single thing that could have gone wrong went wrong. So I don't know. I find it very humbling and sobering, just as a concept. So Permian for me.
Sobering right now.
I'd agree with that. I agree with the Permian being the most interesting mass extinction. What I really like is exploring the biota before that, though.
Yeah, I bet Dapper loves the KPG extinction.
So the KPG extinction it's pretty cool. I mean, there's a lot of interesting stuff about it, like the relatively recent discovery about the and when I say relatively recent, you got to remember that I'm someone with a degree in history. So for me, relatively recent includes the past 50 years or so.
By the way, how did you survive that?
Oh, that's actually classified.
It's a reworked specimen.
But I actually tend to say that the Permian Triassic is, if I have to pick my favorite one, and part of that is just sort of like the hipster reason, like, oh, you might not have heard of it, but you might not know about it because it's not one of the better known extinctions. Like if you ask people about mass extinctions, most people really only know about the Cretaceous Tertiary, or the Cretaceous Paleogene, whatever we're going to call it now, because we like to change terms.
Tertiary is a bad term now.
I know, for reasons that I'm still not completely clear on.
I don't either. It's the same thing between why does America split the Carboniferous into?
I just don't even bother with that. I'm not a geologist, so I don't have to.
I have to pay attention to that.
Yeah.
I need to start adapting myself to American terminology.
Yeah, I grew up calling it the KT and the Cretaceous Tertiary, and Cretaceous, oddly enough, spelled in German, because why wouldn't it be? Yeah, whatever. But no, for me, the Permian Triassic, I think the reason I really find that one the most interesting is not primarily because of the extinction itself, but because of the weirdness that occurred after it. That is weird in a way that I don't think has ever really been matched by any other extinction. You get these absurd forms, these possibly prehensile-tailed sloth lizards that no one knows exactly what they're related to, but they have bird heads and they have a claw on the end of their tail like a weird scorpion claw, and their tails are probably prehensile. And they've turned finger bones into additional arm bones, and you get the phytosaurs that look like crocodiles, but they're definitely not crocodiles. And you get just all these weird wonderful things. Like you get these Sauropterygians that are like turtles with 4 shells instead of 2. You get a lot of really cool stuff in the Triassic, and that's only because there's an adaptive radiation because of just how severe the Permian extinction was. And I really don't think that anything quite that interesting has happened following any of these other mass extinctions. So that's my answer.
All right.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Cool.
So before we sign off or go on another tangent about something, you guys have anything you want to plug?
Yeah, I'll plug a few things. So this Tuesday is Kent with Bent 23. Like I said earlier at the beginning, it is going to be. I'm going to be getting a new video. We're taking a break from the Kent Hovind seminar series for a more topical thing because Kent Hovind got into some of his anti-vax, all you need is the proper vitamins to fight off any disease craziness. So we're going to go into that.
I think that's very relevant in this day and age now.
Right. I'm almost certain it'll be almost immediately demonetized. So you know what? If you're going to watch it, I appreciate the support because, I mean, after it finishes being live, YouTube is not going to promote that at all.
I'll shoot you like $30 on Patreon.
Thanks.
If I get my stimulus check by then, I'll
but yeah, so we're taking a break of that. I already alerted Beethoven, no relation. But then I don't know for certain what's going to happen Thursday. However, Saturday, Colton is coming on for Leaving Young Earth Creationism.
That I am.
Congrats,
So,
Colton.
yep. It'll be. I think it'll be fun.
Thanks for the pressure, boys.
I think everyone here in 2021 hasn't I think everyone here in 2021 hasn't appeared on that series yet.
Yeah, well, Tony, you were never a Young Earth Creationist, right? Or were you? No, you weren't.
No, I never was.
Okay,
No.
so you're not qualified to appear on that show.
I mean, I was willing to entertain the idea, but
Maybe you can pretend to be one.
unlikely.
Let's see. This isn't so much of a plug as it is a thing that is happening, which is to say that AIG has recently joined one of these content ID like conglomerations where basically there's this few companies where your channel can sign up and they will do their content ID monitoring for you. And as a result, they have content ID claimed 6 videos of mine. And I have disputed every single one of them. They now have 30 days to review and uphold or release these content ID claims. If they decide to uphold them, there is a chance that I will then dispute them. And that is a bit of a risky move because it basically means they can sue me. And if they sue, then there's a lawsuit that has to go forth.
Yeah, but they can't sue if it's a review. I mean, you're protected under fair use.
Well, they can sue. It's just that they would almost certainly lose if
I'm not making any anti-AIG videos in that case.
Well, it's also happened to Vice Rhino. One of his most popular videos got a similar content ID claim. I don't know what he's doing about it. But so there's a slim but non-zero chance that I may end up involved in legal action over this. I doubt it, but it is possible. And if that happens, there will almost certainly be a legal defense fund because I'll need it. So
that's the thing. You've got to keep that in mind is that it's not that fair use is wrong. It's that it is a defense. It is not. It is not the law. It is a defense against. So they have absolute right to sue you. Your defense is fair use. So you have to prove that it's fair use.
I have a very strong case that it's fair use because it's very obvious that my videos are neither a replacement for the original. They're not that. They do not substantially. It would be very hard to argue that they substantially impact the market value of the original content. and they are obviously transformative because they have an almost antithetical purpose to the original.
You mean you're not just copying their video and putting it on your channel for
No.
LLC?
Yeah, no, those videos are not simply mirrors of their content. In fact, they don't even include all of their content because I cut some of it out in each case because some of it is boring and stupid, even more so than normal.
I think I'll
yeah, I have a very strong case if it does have to go to court. I don't think it will. I think when I say sue me, they'll probably say, it's probably not worth it to collect the ridiculously low ad revenue you're getting off of these videos.
True.
Yeah.
So hopefully, because then they would have to pay lawyers and whatnot. And AIG is not. They're sort of historically inept at most legal things, except in places where they have strongly, positively biased towards them legal systems. So.
Like Kentucky?
Yeah, basically. Especially that one county, wherever it is that they're in. It was
Williamston or something like that.
Yeah.
So Erica, I know you have at least 2 series going on right now.
Yeah, I got a couple. I've got Earth's Extinction for the Permian coming up soon. It's like half done. I've got it's not the Adapts and the Omamiads. It's the early monkeys of the Eocene coming up soon for human evolution. I've got another freaking Genesis Apologetics video coming up soon. And then now, additionally, I feel obligated ethically to respond to Standing for Truth's very long video.
You're Standing for Truth series now.
I am willing to help with that.
Please do. Yeah, I've got the first one. I'm doing it in parts because he was very helpful. He included timestamps for each of the arguments of mine that they tackled.
In the Twitter, if you need a designated driver for that, call me.
Yeah, that is one of the questions we have to establish is just how drunk should I be for this? Because the answer probably isn't 0.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like for streams, I'm down to get wild. But if recorded videos, I try to have, because usually I'm linking papers or discussing papers or studies or whatever. But I mean, I'm with you, Colton. I got a good buzz going right now. So I'm
jealous.
If he wants to talk tonight, I am happy to.
I'm jealous.
I just want it to be chill, relaxed. Why do you believe
get an invite to this link? You can.
Other than the Bible.
Okay, here's what Standing says, Colton. He says, "Hey Erica, sounds fun. At the moment, I'm deep into biology and genetics as I'm preparing for a debate next week with Conspiracy Cats on these topics. That being said, I would want to prep a bit on geology, a lone debate or discussion, especially if by the sounds of it, your friend is fluent on the topic, which I would absolutely say that you are. One person, one person who comes to mind if I believe would be more than happy to discuss geology at a moment's notice would be Nephilim Free. Want me to set that up with you? I can see if he's available for tonight or tomorrow if you'd like. What do you want me to say?
With a Nephi?
You want to discuss with Nephi? It's up to you.
I mean, I wouldn't.
I mean,
hey, you do you.
I mean, he's just.
He might.
I'm wanting somebody who's going to talk about the standard creationist theories. Just don't throw some crackpot lunar bukkake stuff at me.
Yeah, that's what Nephi's gonna do.
No.
Yeah, no. If you want to discuss catastrophic plate tectonics, that's one thing, but not that stuff.
I'll tell Standing that you want to chat with him, and we'll see when he can do that.
Okay. Tell him there's no rush.
Yeah. Remember, if you gotta talk about geology, you gotta remember to stay up on abiogenesis too.
Yeah, obviously.
Yeah, because not only is evolution tied to abiogenesis, but clearly actualism is tied to abiogenesis.
And the Big Bang too. Don't forget the Big Bang about geology.
Yeah.
If you guys do end up needing a venue and you don't want it to be Standing, I
will happily do it on Dapper's channel.
I can't guarantee because I don't know exactly when it will be and when I'll be free, but I'm saying that assuming that I can, I am willing to host such a thing.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Colton, you got anything coming up on your channel?
I need to start. Oh, so that's it.
Well, as I said, I'm going to be doing a video very soon on information and information theory. Unfortunately, I've had to take an actual course on information theory to be able to refute it. But We've talked about the Jackson Wheat video, or Jackson Wheat
love it.
and RG Downer book. I actually bought it, and just in case you're wondering, as you're looking to your right, those are the references. So here's the best part.
I love those two to death.
Oh man.
That's the
So
thing.
great.
Those are references. So if you're worried about reading something this thick, just realize that little bit that I've got off to the right or your left is the references.
RJ loves good sourcing. You gotta love
My
it.
copy.
So Tony, are you finally gonna prove how cars and Microsoft Word prove creationism?
Oof.
Oh yeah, that'll be good.
That's my goal. Yeah. No. No. What I've found is, I mean, I've taken an entire college courses on information theory simply to ask this question, and I've done that because I have the time. That's because we have this apocalypse going on right now.
Perfect.
I mean,
So-
I just spent most of this morning, while I was waiting for this to start, reading about the dynamics of coastal river systems like deltas and tidal channels, specifically because on my blog a while ago, I did some teardown of an argument by Ariel Roth about like how much erosion should be expected at unconformities versus how much should be, or versus how much there is. And he did this stupid argument of, well, the continental average is 30 meters per million years, as if you can take the average across the continent, which includes both the very high rates in the uplands and the very low rates in the lowlands, and just apply that anywhere. And then he also said, well, yeah, so you multiply that by however many million years the unconformity was for, and that tells you how much vertical erosion you should have. Ignoring the fact that if you have a piece of land that's only uplifted 100 feet above sea level, rivers can't cut deeper than sea level. It does not matter how long it's exposed for. It's an observable physical phenomena. Don't hit me with that historical science bullshit. You can see this today, and I was reading about it because the closest thing to an argument against that Roth gave was this claim of, well, what if the unconformities happened underwater? Would that make people safe? And it's like, well, he's like, no, because erosion happens underwater. It's like, yeah, erosion happens underwater. So does deposition. They fight each other. And I was reading because about like with tidal channels, you know, if he wants to say, well, maybe there the tidal currents will just keep deepening it. No, because as you can see with tidal channels and tidal dynamics, what happens is you get this channel and then it branches out, and then water will preferentially start flowing down one, which causes the other to start clogging up with sediment and getting shallower, and then that new one gets deeper, but now that opens up to another one, and it's not a stable system that channels linearly. So I don't know what Roth was getting on at.
Is
but
that the thing that causes those curvy river things?
Yep, it's the same thing with meanders. Meanders aren't stable.
I actually had a debate with somebody about that, and they were talking about the deposition rates of sediment and they cited papers, and the papers tended to focus on Southeast Asia, which
the massive monsoons.
Massive monsoons, the fact that they have rice paddies, the fact that they do a lot of farming that depends on these streams coming down. And so I started to notice that there was a trend there, that everywhere that they made these claims had to do with these farming areas where they were using a lot of
agriculture has substantially increased terrestrial erosion.
Absolutely, thank you.
It's actually about doubled. It's actually about doubled. From the average erosion rate across the continent, thanks to our efforts, has doubled from about. I mean, Roth wasn't wrong, but I don't know if his calculation was still accurate. But it's instead of 30 meters per million years, it's about 60 meters. We've doubled it.
Wow.
Of course, again, you can't compare an average of the entire continent to a specific environment. In coastal areas, it's closer to about maybe 5 meters a million years. But I digress.
Really fast. I need to plug my thing real fast. Next Saturday, I'm interviewing another Australian, the Vagrant Sam, his channel or not, but he'll be in the podcast next Saturday.
Cool.
Awesome.
That sounds cool.
All right, dudes. I'm gonna head out.
All right. Actually, Erica,
Me too.
right quick. I did send you in your email a copy of the video that I uploaded. So feel free to upload that to your channel. You can
Excellent. Yes.
may or may not. I don't care. Change my intro outro to yours. Either way, it's up to you.
Before I end this, you want to y'all if you have a catchphrase, any catchphrase, you want to say it now?
Rocks don't lie.
Nice.
I had to investigate.
Be good apes.
I'm the dapper dinosaur. I don't know. I got nothing.
All right.
I'm getting stewed by AIG.
Maybe.
Never stop learning and enjoy the randomness. We'll see you
Bye,
next time.
guys.
Bye.
Yeah.